How's it going, 40?
Not too bad, Nimes. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy we're on Twitter right now too. We finally got that horse shit figured out. Um,
It's pretty janky, eh? I was experimenting it with myself not too long ago.
yeah, this platform and a lot of others should integrate, but there's a bunch of technical shit for like the last two streams that I really wanted to go on there because we get a lot of views on there.
Mm.
But I'm not gonna waste anyone's time with a bunch of tech shit. I'm here with a good friend. I was trying to think about that before the stream. I was trying to think, have we known each other for years? I think we maybe have known each other for years. I don't know for sure, but it feels that way.
Yeah, like maybe a year and a half, 2 years, however long I've been in the chat. I don't even remember how long I've been in the chat or what even dragged me in there. I want to
I don't
say,
remember a time before the chat.
oh wow, yeah.
It, yeah, I forget. I think you showed up with the Laughing Man, I think, and you have written some very very fascinating things lately.
Well,
But
thank you.
I used to know you just as a cool, interesting guy, and now you're the most famous man in dissident Canada, and it's a great thing to see, frankly.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And you know what? It's first of all, I want to say that it's an honor, obviously, to be on the show, to be on this live stream. Because if not for you, honestly, for yourself and Judas, and if not for John Carter, then I wouldn't have started writing. It was your review of Martin Gurry's populist. What was it? Populist? No,
No,
that's
that was a Revolt of the Public. Was that one?
Revolt to the Public. That's right. And there's an excerpt in that book where they talk about how online spaces have become these sort of communities. And in order to affirm one's identity, to affirm one's existence, you have to almost create. You can't be a passive observer. And for some reason that really hit me hard. I was like, damn, I gotta be somebody. I gotta do something.
Yeah, well,
So
it is true, and you really need to, and that's especially important, I think, these days when people's radars are so finely tuned to look for bots, look for
mhm,
suspicious activity. A lot of people think they can just kind of be this free floating lurker, then show up. But especially in our spaces, people like someone who's vetted. People like
mhm.
someone where I know what their footprint is. They're not some mysterious man in black who just came into town. And sometimes that's commenting because I was talking to Pan European just last episode about like this scene's kept alive by the guys behind the scenes, the ligaments between
Mhm.
these scenes, and they don't have their own shows, they don't seek out that sort of thing, but they make connections and they help promote this stuff because no one's finding this stuff. I think a lot of people like me, I'm used to sort of an old internet where you'd write something and people could just find it. No one finds anything unless it's broadcast by these like power nodes that really get out
Absolutely.
there.
Absolutely. And it's all word to mouth too. Like the entire Telegram ecosystem, I would say, is all just been, hey, I know a guy who knows a guy, and they produce content, or they're really smart, or we enjoy their takes, or whatever it is, right? So
Telegram's my favorite platform because of how unintuitive it was. And maybe
mhm.
that's changed, but for me, when I first got on Telegram so many years ago, it's not obvious what to do. And you just kind of
No,
gotta like meet people who invite you to places, to other chats, these things,
that's
and then
right.
eventually you're a known person. But if you're just like a weirdo, there seems to be more filters there, and I like it. I like this thing we got going now. I hope it doesn't go away, and I hope Telegram isn't just a giant op.
I
Because I've
think
said this before, I don't know how Telegram makes money for all of
mhm.
the file hosting it does. There's so many files hosted there, it's fucking insane.
It is very strange. I will say that it does have obviously security advantages. Like it's hosted in Dubai or the United Arab Emirates. It's out of the hands of U.S. and Russian enforcement or law enforcement agencies. So it's not like they can get subpoenaed. You know what I mean? And there's only been one or two instances where they've had to give up some kind of information, and that was for very specific, like actual Islamic terror coordination or something to that effect. And this only happened one or two times. So it's an all around pretty, I'd say, secure platform. But I would agree with you. It is a little bit strange. There's something odd about, like, how are you telling me you have 800 million users and all of these files are hosted: music, movies, uh, you know,
Yeah,
texts, books. Is
it's
very
like, oh, he just likes freedom. No one likes freedom. We like
no.
sex. We like being correct, and it's
That's
those
right.
two things. That's
Yeah.
it. There's no third thing that anyone likes. Uh, but
Hmm.
I'm here. There's going to be a lot of people who want to listen to this episode because, like I said, your Substacks, and people can check the bottom of the screen there, fortissax.substack.com,
Hmm.
um, to check out some of the more recent ones. And a lot of these Substacks, they emerge from conversations you had. And I just, let's start with what I always found the most interesting about you. Was also what I found interesting about Mike from Imperium Press, who I've been a great admirer of for a long, long time. And he would probably call himself a pagan. I don't even like using that word. I think pagan is sort of like barbarian. It's like a catch-all term, almost as used as pejorative. But he might
Right.
call himself a pagan who is not openly hostile to Christianity and seems
No.
to be interested in the space between the two or some kind of synthesis. And he thinks very deeply on the subject, whereas others, everyone's out here just saying Christianity is Jewish and the Christians just saying pagans are demon worshippers. It's very tiring. And there's only a few people that I think are approaching the problem seriously. And you're one of them. Would that be an accurate summary?
Yeah, I would say the thing is, I have a great many friends who are Christians, and I've realized that my own my own spiritual experiences, I guess, and I don't like to talk about this a lot because it's kind of cheesy, and there's a lot of talk about, oh, I felt this and I saw this sign from this person, this god, and what. I don't like to talk about it very often because it's kind of cringe. It comes off as a little bit weird. But I could sense in a lot of my Christian friends a sincerity, a deep and profound connection for those who were born and raised in that religion. I could sense a deep and profound connection that they didn't want to let go, and that they actually sincerely believed in, and that this is the way that they wanted to live and model their lives uh, after. And I respected it. And I respected it because there were a lot of pagans as well that I didn't quite see with that level of sincerity. And there's a very small number of people on all sides, I would say, who have a that kind of sincerity to them. But for many of those Christians, a great many of them are my friends, and the 11th hour is approaching. I feel that there is a increased need for cooperation and mutual respect, and yeah, so I would say, yeah, I'm pro Christian. I'm one of the few who is a pro Christian pagan.
Yeah, well, that's one thing we've tried to cultivate, especially in our chat, which is we get a lot of different types of people. In a very real way, diversity is our strength at Blood Satellite. But we get a lot of Christians and pagans in the same spaces. So I think what's interesting is if you're a Christian, oftentimes you migrate to Christian spaces and you never
Mhm.
interface with anyone else. Same with pagans. You go to pagan spaces and you just kind of talk about each other. But I know for you and I, like being in a space where you're always talking to these people, it's very difficult to make caricatures of them. And so
Mhm.
you're usually confronted by, like, you can't just talk shit because someone
No.
will like pipe up and try and correct you. So you either need to shut up or like think seriously about what you're saying. And I think uh, if people maintain that, and they maintain that with the idea of some kind of unity in mind. So, what's the unity that I would say? Well, it might be political, it might be ethnic, it might be nationalist, because I think there's a lot of people, pagans and Christians alike, who would unite under some sort of arguably ethno nationalist background, or ethnic
Yes.
or nationalist, or some combination thereof.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that it's just all of this sectarian stuff is like everybody agrees on 90 to 95% of all things. They may disagree on how to get there. They may disagree on how it looks like, but the end result is something that is mostly shared by most people, I would say.
Well, yeah, and also, I'm reading this great book now that I bet you would find interesting. I believe it was published by Antelope Hill. It was The New Nobility of Blood and Soil
Hmm.
by what's his fucking name? He's basically just an SS officer. His name, the forward was done by Warren Baylog.
Huh.
Who the fuck was it? New Nobility of Blood and Soil by Richard Dare.
Hmm.
Great book. And you would find it very interesting because it's speaking. And I just finished Archaeofuturism, which you recommended, and we're going to
Yes.
cover that on the show. It kind of builds off of the Bronze Age pervert stuff that we just did, because these are both related to that.
Yes. I
Um,
would
so
going so far as I would say that Bronze Age pervert and the whole vitalist stream is kind of a watering down, almost like a mass popularized version of the ideological foundation behind archaeofuturism.
yeah, and there's a lot in Archaeofuturism. Also Archaeofuturism, our review is almost a sequel to Reflections on Violence by Georges Sorel, which
Hmm.
is like a
Yes.
leftist looking back on the post French Revolution and saying, and the French New Left, and saying, what the fuck happened?
Hmm.
This guy, he was the Archaeofuturist, and he's looking at the New Right and saying, what the fuck happened? Both from distinctly French perspectives, which is really interesting. But
Hmm.
New Nobility of Blood and Soil, it's tracking what happened, and I'm only like 100 pages in, but he's describing the different types of German nobility.
Hmm.
And like with what was it? What was that book? The one by Fustel de Collage, Ancient City. It kind of it harkens back to like an ancient time. What were the Germanic people like pre-Christianity?
Hmm.
What was their society like? What was, the thing, the free men coming together? What was their tribe like, and the family? And then how did he would argue imposition, but how would Christianity have changed the nature of leadership, and therefore the nature of nobility? Who got elected to the nobility and why? And basically how that turned Germany upside down.
Hmm.
But it's an interesting book that like so many different people touch on this stuff, but once you get the historical backing of this transition from a pre-Christian, arguably pagan, in, and kind of what it keeps carrying with it, but what ends up getting inverted. How does the
Right.
leader turn into the king, and what does that have to do on the psychology of the people? And ultimately, the book is saying we need a new type of nobility that is built on ancient customs and ancient moralities. So it's like 500 pages long. So I'll see how long it takes me to get through. But I think you and people who are into the same stuff that you're into would like that.
Yeah. Huh. I'll add that to the list for sure. I'm already, yeah, it's funny you touch on that because I mean, as you know, from the many conversations in the chat, I brought up the book, The Germanization of Medieval Christianity. And that was actually written by, I believe, a member of SSPX, like a guy who was a member of the Society of St. Pius X. So the guy was like a rad trad. He was like a radical Catholic traditionalist. But he goes through like an anthropological study of conversion and how conversion mechanics work and why certain conversions to, sub-Saharan Africans don't work, and why some of them, like such as the case of the Germanic tribes in Europe, did work. And he just goes into really like deep detail into like a lot of the weird syncretic customs uh, that occurred during the time. Like you see Christian burials with crosses, but you see all of the feet facing northward, which is an ancient Germanic pagan custom. But and yet the tombstone has crosses and Christian references, or you see
Yeah.
things like depictions of Jesus, but you can't tell if it's Jesus or Odin because he's missing an eye, but he's carrying a spear. But he's not, it's not the full Germanic get up. So they really, yeah, it's really interesting that
What was that
you
called
brought
again?
that
I'd
up.
love to look into that.
The Germanization of Medieval Christianity by James C. Russell.
All right, I'm gonna look and probably review it on the show, because that's right up
Yeah,
my alley. And as you're
it's
saying that, I was reminded of, actually, I just cut you off there. Sorry.
no, I was.
Continue.
It's good. I was going to say that's one of the two books that I'm looking into right now to sort of come up with this notion of Christian vitalism to sort of bridge this gap between these two different groups. And the other book is The Saxon Savior: The Germanic Transformation of the Gospel in the Ninth Century Heliond, by Reverend Murphy G. Ronald. And this dude was I guess a trad cath from New Jersey or something, and he translates the Heliont, which is a ninth century German text, and what actually converted the Saxon tribes, not the chopping down of the oak tree, not the burning of the Irminsul. It was this collaborative effort, this cooperation between these two different groups that actually led to the mass conversion of the Germans. And some pagans would say, oh well, they had to, they had to fool the Germans, and the Christians would say, oh well, this waters Christianity down too much, and it's missing the point. And it's like, well, no, not entirely. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is there's a lot more nuance to what people are willing to admit when it comes to these things.
This looks great too. I'd love to review this. I was about to say, I was reminded, even though I haven't read too deep into this, the one thing we did read was Albion Seed, which
Hmm.
is a pretty popular book in our spaces. And one thing I always return to is for people who haven't read it, it's a really interesting book, especially if you're into American history. We did a whole mini arc on the founding of America plus the American Revolution a bit later, but it was about the founding peoples of America, these four distinct migrations. The book American Nations kind of argues for more. I think there's like nine. It depends if you count New Amsterdam as one, but like the four main folkways that built America. And one thing, and how do you define a folkway? Well, and I talk about this in a Vanguard's journal article. You break it down in like 20, 24 uh, items. It's
Hmm.
like how do you know you are a people? How can you differentiate between people culturally? It's like, well, there's how they dress, and there's how they cook, and how they raise their kids. Everything matters. But then there's these two items. One was religion ways, what religion they have, and the other is magic ways, or so it was called. And you remember that, oh, despite all these people being Christian, they still believed in ghosts. They still had various
Yes.
other superstitions. They still, like you had said, they bury under the cross, but bury a certain way. So
Hmm.
I was always fascinated about what ancient folkways persisted over time. And I was building this into a larger argument, and I don't even know how I'm going to do this, but I was saying that the idea of cognitive dissonance being bad almost seems like a Marxist idea, because their whole thing was like the internal inconsistency or the internal contradictions
Yes.
of a system will lead it to collapse. But that doesn't seem to ever be the fucking case.
No,
And yeah,
there's always room for some kind of hypocrisy or inconsistencies, and I'm noticing that now too. I'm noticing that especially among them, right? Like I just recently got into an argument with a self-proclaimed Marxist who is basically just a giga liberal, like a full-blown Fukuyama end of history and the last man ultra lib, where they were like, no, we need maximal freedom of expression forever, and the Olympics is part of our culture and proof of that. But also, we can't have you burn a cross or a swastika because that there has to be limits, and the limits have to be for you, not for me. And any, and then I asked him, I was like, hey, so is it possible for a person to be simply disgusted with the way that the LGBT groups conduct themselves in public? Is it possible to be disgusted and not be biased or bigoted? And they said, no, that voice inside your head is inherent at all times and you have to suppress it. I'm like, okay, you're not consistent in your beliefs at all. You're
yeah,
not. And so to go back to that, I agree with you. When it comes to folkways, it seems like there's always room for like this, you know, it be like that. It's
yeah.
like I want to give
It,
an example on that.
I was gonna
Just
say,
if
dealing with those people, if I can just interrupt, is very interesting. Cognitive dissonance, for people who need to engage with these people, all cognitive dissonance is a fork in the road psychologically. They'll just
Mhm.
pick one. And if they find that you're the type of person who presents them with two or more forks in the road, they just classify you as a negative agent, almost like a Scientologist would, and they'll
Mhm.
just go away from you. You can see this happen all the time. If they get a whiff that your line of inquiry is right coded or fascistic or something, they'll just like stonewall you and everything. So it's not like you could even
Yeah.
gotcha them to any significant degree.
Yeah, and but to go back to your point too, which is like, yeah, internal consistencies is probably and the obsession with that and trying to maintain logical consistencies an absolute degree is a very modern thing. And when we go into practices and folkways, as you were talking about, like 200 years ago, the English still did something called wassailing. I don't speak old or middle English, but this is the practice around Christmas time of boiling a type of mead or creating a type of hot drink. And you'd go and knock on your neighbor's door and you'd hand them this mead like drink I guess like in a horn or something. And depictions of Father Christmas are basically just a man with a Yule log around his shoulder that he splits and then he lights it on fire, and he's wearing a holly crown. I find that very interesting. He's
Yeah.
still called Father Christmas, but that's very clearly not Jesus or
Well,
Santa.
yeah, it's so funny. Like, I'm a Catholic, of course, and there's Christians who listen. Why the fuck do we do Christmas at all? That all seems like pagan stuff. So, we're able
Yeah,
to do that.
right.
Right?
And but my point is that a modern like a modern person would look at that, even if they were, I don't know, a Christian identifying, and say, well, there's no consistency. We have to omit this. There's no consistency in our faith. We have to omit that. And it's like, dude, your great grandparents didn't give a shit. They did it anyway, right?
What's
Like,
fucking funny? I've noticed a trend because my wife, like most women, is into Christmas movies. And so every girl's got their favorite ones, but I've noticed that more and more recently have like ancient European folklore woven into it. There's this really good one called Klaus.
hmm,
I recommend people, especially this year. It's like a 2019 made by Sergio Pablos. Go figure. But
hmm,
it's a Christmas story set in like pre-Christian England, or no, pre-Christian, not England, somewhere in the north anyway. But
interesting.
it's just full. It's like peasants and like weird shit, and the animation some of the coolest I think you're ever going to see. Anyway, but I'm
Hmm.
noticing like more and more integration of like ancient European folklore into Santa. Maybe that means nothing. Maybe everyone thinks I'm a fucking idiot for going down this path. But you know
No,
what? I want to talk about Santa Claus.
absolutely. And Santa, yeah, Santa's an interesting figure because he's this amalgamation of a whole bunch of different things just transforming and then folding and then refolding into itself and becoming something new. And yeah, yeah, Santa's weird. Santa is the convergence of American consumerism, the Dutch sport Pete, and the English Father Christmas. And like that's literally what Santa is. It's this weird amalgamation of all of these things.
Yeah,
It's
well, and
a
that's what I find interesting, and that's why I think your investigations into this, and I would include my own, and also Mike, also many others who like this. To me, is the most interesting thing we've got going on right now. It's viewing the reconciliation of paganism and Christianity
mhm.
within the European context, within a non-universalizing context.
Yes.
When we talk about Christianity, we are speaking of the European interpretation of it. And then within Christianity, the reconciliation between Catholicism and Protestantism, and all of the appendages there. Like that to me, that doesn't need to necessarily be a huge gulf. I think there's a way to work through that as long as there is a momentum of survival in it. Like
Hmm.
it's not just ideological bickering, really. Like, this is, you are talking about the DNA of this people. It's
Yes.
not just free floating ideas. Like this is really really important stuff. And anyway, I think of all the things we bicker about, this might be I think the most optimistic of the stuff. Like
Yeah.
I don't think we're ever really going to reconcile economic debates. It's just whatever happens.
Yeah, for me, what actually spurred this too was just reading the initial pages of the James C. Russell book. But I was exploring the history of the Normans because I was actually exploring Canadian history. I was looking into the history of the Quebecois because I made a number of threads on it, right? And they're an integral part of the Canadian nation. They are a massive quantity of European Canadians by blood, by ethnic Canadians. They're like 24% of all of them in the entire country. They have some of the longest standing claims and have inhabited this territory for among some of the longest periods of time. And so I was looking into their history, and I happened to be like, where are they from in France? Huh, they're from Normandy. That's very interesting. Let's look at the history of the Normans. And it's like, well, these people were Norse pagan Vikings who were given land and territory, and they were told, uphold the king's law. And Rollo said, fine, I'll do that. And he did it a little too efficiently. And Norman society, apparently, it was a land known for robbers and bandits and criminals and all kinds of stuff. Apparently, Rollo cleaned it right up. He converted to Christianity. They're like, fine, I will enforce the king's law. And they did it. But then they decided to conquer England, and and then they went to the Mediterranean, and a Norman mercenary saw Sicily, and he decided to take it. and then they did some work for Italian princes, Lombardic, Germanic princes in southern Italy, and they decided, I don't want payment. Instead, I want this land. And so they took that land. And they did all of this in the name of Christ. They decided to conquer and be cool and badass and heroic in the name of Jesus Christ. And I think that's very fascinating. I think that's a different kind of Christianity from what is often depicted in the in the late Roman Empire, and what is depicted afterwards, like in the Renaissance or in the early modern period in the 1600s, and what's also depicted in the romantic, very nostalgic look of Tolkien and Chesterton, right? Like, I love Lord of the Rings and I love Chronicles of Narnia, um, but I don't know. As a side criticism, I would say a lot of Christians, it almost seems like their gospel is Lord of the Rings and Narnia. Like, the dudes with like medieval paintings for profile pictures, who are, intense medieval scholars, and they're like trad caths, they're like traditional Catholicists. But like all they post is that kind of stuff, and I'm just like, I think that this is your religion, because you're a young, sensitive man with a bit of romance to him, and this appeals to you the most. But you eschew the more aggressive elements of Germanic Christianity that existed previously. I don't
Yeah,
know.
with a lot of Christians, and we're not speaking of anyone in particular, I'm sure, but you see them, you see these people around, and it seems that they adopt Christianity like one would a brand. And people adopt
Hmm.
brands all the time because
Hmm.
it fills a hole in their identity. But these are very, very deep and serious topics. You can really lose yourself in them if you treat them seriously.
Hmm.
It's a deeply personal thing. The last thing you want
Yes.
to do is just immediately use it as a cudgel against people online. It almost devalues it, I think. And,
Yeah.
and you see these people sometimes. You see that men and women do it a bit differently, but I do think you're absolutely correct. For the record, you also do see that with like Viking lore too.
Absolutely.
I
Oh
I I,
man.
th- I think we need to take a break from Vikings for a while, and then we gotta put a halt on Vikings until we figure out what's going on.
I agree. Yeah, there's a lot going on that front. Oh, there's a lot going on that front, and I think you're right too that people do adopt it as a brand, because they lack identity and purpose, or they feel that this specific religion will give them a structure that they can follow in their day to day. And some of them, maybe they're not even believers. Maybe they're just doing it because they want to cultivate faith somehow. Maybe they're agnostic, they have their doubts, but they want to follow
Yeah.
this thing, they want to see where it leads, right? And I think that's it. But I also think that, I think you're onto something when you say it's a brand, because there's a lot of lore guys, there's a lot of Christian lore guys, and it's almost like they approach the Bible and Psalms and like Christianity from the perspective of someone looking into like Warhammer 40K lore, you know what I mean?
Well, because there's
Or
people you'll see who hop between denominations of Christianity, and my sense is that they're looking for an army to join,
Mhm.
because they start off they want to find an extreme army just to basically hate on gays. And I would say to them, you can hate on gays anywhere. You can do it by yourself for free. You don't need to,
Yeah.
consume a Eucharist. You don't need to, be baptized for that. You should just do it as an atheist, hanging out if you want to. You don't need to
Yeah.
be a new type of guy for that. But sometimes they are looking for a praxis, like a political praxis, or they join
Yes.
Christianity or paganism politically, and I think
Correct.
that's the bad way to approach it.
And on that note, I will say that political paganism is insanely stupid. I think it's an incredibly bad idea, and I think that anti-Christianity, as a political front, is as stupid as political Christianity. I think that knocking Christianity is one of the dumbest possible things you can do. It is, whether people like it or not, it is a part of us. It's part of our heritage. It's part of our history. It is not, and in the way that it was part of our history is not in the way that a lot of these radical Christians online depict it as. It's nothing like that. And so it's dear to the hearts of a great many people who are still with us. And it's just bad optics, like it or not. Being a pagan in 2024 is weird, because you're defending Christianity from Browns and Muslims. but then you're being attacked by Christians for being a pagan. So it's,
Yeah.
but you have to defend it because it is intrinsically Western, and a lot of it historically was also kind of pagan in some ways, right? Like, and so, but it has value, and yeah, I just wanted to say
I
that.
would say, just to address Mark Trouble in the chat, I also like Thomas Aquinas. I wasn't
Mm,
saying there's any logical inconsistencies, and we're not knocking 40k Warhammer 40k. Who doesn't love
no,
Warhammer 40k?
absolutely, I love 40k. We were just saying that there are guys who treat the Bible and Psalms and Christian, Christian canon as 40k lore. It's like
I
they're,
just say this about 40k though. The more I get into that lore, the more I'm annoyed by it. Like
mhm,
I was watching. I don't know why. I got other shit to do. I'd had this in the background. It was like an investigation into the heart Earth, the heart of the Imperium. Like, what's life like in on the Terran world? And it's just like cyberpunk stuff. It's like there's the
yes,
cathedrals, but then there's roving mutant gangs. Like, this is lame. There's
yes.
so much lame shit in 40k. We all love Space Marines. We all love like Catholic robots or whatever. And like, you know, I like the stuff where it's like the fucking Necron. It's like, what if a skeleton was a robot? Yeah, I like that shit. But then you read a book
what
on it. It's
if
like, wow, this sucks.
what if German World War I soldiers were like futuristic and cool, and then you get the Death Corps of Krieg, right? It's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's good stuff in there, but then there's a lot of there's so much bad lore. There's so much bad world building. It takes, like, Lord of the Rings is notable because all the world building you like and you still want more.
Mhm.
If it's kind of complete in the way it's been portrayed, but you love every second of it. There's a lot of world building lore where I could take or leave a third of it.
Yes,
You know?
yeah, and it's like it's exhaustingly deep too in 40k. It's like how much there's like how many books do I have to read of this just to get the fucking basic grasp? You know what I mean?
Look, we like Warhammer 40k for the same reason we like Spawn. It's because there's chains, there's big guns, and there's spikes that don't make any logical sense. That's it. I don't
That's
need
right.
a whole bunch of fucking math. I don't need a bunch of homework. I don't even want to play the game. I just want to
No,
look at the pictures.
that's right.
I want to see a man the size of a skyscraper, and he's got his exposed head right at the top, and he's screaming.
That's right. A guy in a giant tank with a sword.
Warhammer 40k is the only stuff you could paint when you're drunk. I think that's why artists like it. You can just do a lot of meth and a lot of bourbon and come out with something that everybody likes. If you're an artist and you draw Warhammer 40k stuff, your son and your dad are both going to like it. What else can you say about? Can you say that about any other type of art? When's the last time you didn't paint a tree where your dad didn't want to call you a fucking queer? Not speaking from experience, doesn't matter. Moving on.
Right. I would actually agree with Winkler's comment here. He's the son. Why don't you put down the building books and go build something in the world? 110%. That's actually why I started the Substack.
Hey, son, why don't you stop smoking grass and go touch grass? Then my son school shoots me. A school shooting is a fucking shooting that
Uh,
any 14-year-old can do. We're
that's right.
really getting off the rails here. There's like Fortissax fans who are just going to listen to
Oh,
this. Who's this fucking Dimes guy talking about?
no, hey, you know what? I gotta tell you, every every live stream I've been on, I've had to name drop Blood Satellite. I am loyal.
Oh,
This is the community that I'm from, and I always say, listen, if not for John Carter and for Dimes and Judas and Blood Satellite, I would not be here because they encouraged me due to that Martin Geary book, and the realization that I would lack personhood if I didn't produce if I didn't get my thoughts out there, that I wouldn't have started writing. So
well, and there's something to be said, and I would also encourage others to do that. A
mhm,
lot of people, they think they got good ideas, and you don't know really until you write them down, and you
right.
don't really know if they're good unless you show them to an audience. And yours were immediately relatable because I get the fucking call.
Oh
I'm at
man.
my desk. I hear, oh, 40 published his very first Substack. Oh, it reached number 4 on Substack in the globally. I'm
Yes.
like, oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. Good for him. Yeah, good for that.
Number 4 in the culture section of Substack. Yeah,
Oh,
and
he's
like,
oh, he's
uh,
immediately beloved. Okay, okay.
it's still getting it's whack. It's still getting shares too, like by people who haven't seen it. And
Made it
that
so
would
all the way up to JD Vance, I hear.
oh, he's not gonna like the Jeet hate.
But this stuff, I do think that there is, and I think you're part of this, and we're hopefully part of this too. I think there's an emergence of distinctly Canadian
Yes.
content, in the sense that Canadians are always extremely online. And for
Mhm,
some reason, Canadians seem to dominate a lot of right wing spaces. Don't
mhm,
ask me why. I have some theories, but we very rarely speak about Canadian issues. And that's something
mhm,
we tried to do on Blood Satellite, talk about Canadian history, Canadian, not just recent politics, but contextualize it with older stuff. But I was very delighted to see that you go pretty deep into Canadian history, which isn't really
yeah.
explored that much. And I'm as guilty as anyone. I'm pretty bad at that. I'm trying to change that. But hearing you talk about the genealogy of Canadians and, the founding of the country, it's interesting shit.
It is very interesting shit, and it gets passed over because, as you know, since the early 1900s, really, and since the invention of the radio, Canadians have just been enamored with the behemoth to the south. And I can't remember who it was, but they once said that like Canada is like a mouse living next to an elephant. And so Canadians, as you know, tend to focus more on American issues and know more about American history, and also the flood of American movies and entertainment and media and music and all this. And that's been going on for a long time. It's literally been going on since the late 1890s to the early 1900s, right? So we've always had to contend with that. But that doesn't mean that we're not a people, and that doesn't mean that we don't have our own history, which is deep and is interesting. And part of my whole project, with this was to bring that to light. I want us to see that we are a people, not a proposition, and we have been here for a very long time.
Yeah, and that's something that we try to get into even in the Vanguard's journal. Like, how do you, if Canadians refuse broadly to believe that there is such a thing as a foundational Canadian identity, because many white, we might call them old stock Canadians, but
Mhm,
Euro Canadians is what Dr. Duchesne would call us. But let's
mhm.
just say like white Canadians, a great number of them don't think that there's a foundational Canadian identity, and the government doesn't seem to believe so. So
No.
if that is the case, how would you generate one? How could you make a case for one? We kind of know what it's like in Quebec. We see them do it.
Yes. I mean, that Quebec is, in a sense, like Quebec nationalism is like open ethnic white nationalism. Like it,
Yeah,
it is the advocacy. Now, mind you, it's been watered down into linguistic chauvinism over the years. And a lot of their efforts are petty and they're misdirected towards stupid things like correcting the names of Italian restaurants. But the in-group identification is there. It just needs to be expanded to Anglo Canada. And at one point it was, right? Like at one point, like I actually, on my Telegram channel, I shared it today. A quote from actually Canada, the unknown country. He's another person on Telegram. I'm not sure who he is, but he produces some interesting historical stuff. But there's a quote by Sir Robert Borden, who was the Prime Minister of Canada in 1905, and he said that any man who has not some feeling and pride in his ancestry, who does not honor the traditions of the race from which he sprang, cannot be a good Canadian. And it is well for the future of this country, it is well for the future of our people as a whole, that there should be, in fact, the two great races, meaning the Anglos and the French, who dominate this country, a feeling on either side of attachment to language and pride of race.
yeah,
So there was
that's a
a
great point.
conscious and cognizant uh, uh, realization of Canadians as an Anglo-French nation from the very beginning. Like it's always been that way. In fact, Pierre Trudeau actually despised that. He despised the bicultural identity of the country.
Yeah, it's for those who don't know that much about Canadian history. Justin Trudeau, who had a dad named Pierre Trudeau, who may have been worse depending on how you
Mhm.
look at it. In terms of worse, as in did more lasting damage, whereas Trudeau is just buffoonish. But Pierre Trudeau really helped codify, I think, believe the Immigration Act
Mhm.
in 1973. Um, there's a great article, not to shill my own shit. There's a great article on the Vanguardist Journal. I'm shilling this because I didn't write it. It's called Paving Over the Public, and it's
Yes.
written by an individual named Cooper, who has a byline on the Daily Rake. If people are familiar with that site, check it out. He writes a lot on there. He wrote this essay that we both workshopped into an article, and it's a fascinating account of 20th century Canadian history, showing not only it shows two main things. One, that going back to Sir John A. Macdonald, our first prime minister, and we were documenting based off of you know documents that were pulled from Parliament, right? How
Hmm.
they were speaking at the time. There was an awareness of what the European races were. They knew that they were Anglo and French stock, and that they
Absolutely.
wanted to keep it that way. Sir Johnny MacDonald was using the word Aryan back then, by the way. That's on the
Yes.
fucking record.
Yeah.
But then furthermore, it shows how mass migration happened in Canada. If you would read the news right now, you would think that Canada was always about diversity. It was always about multiculturalism. It's only been that way for a couple of decades, and it was due to the bureaucratic machinations of a few key people starting in the fucking 60s, arguably the 50s.
Yes.
But the every time they took public opinion polls, and we show these polls, and we're going to be showing it in a little short film that we've been working on the past couple months that's going to come out soon. I'm really excited about it. People will see that when it airs. um, but we show there's actual Gallup polls and opinion polls from the
Yeah.
40s, the 50s, the 60s, people asking, do you want more immigrants? And it's like 70% no, 60% no.
No.
It's about the failure of populism, in a sense, when the people want one thing, but so clearly we think it's a new thing with the governments now. No, this was back in the fucking 40s. That's how we got here.
Yep. It's the same with the flag. Nobody wanted the flag change. Nobody wanted the debate, right? And it was forced on the country anyway. And they had to take down the flag because it implied a certain ethnic exclusivity to the nation. Because right there, the fat shield on the Canadian coat of arms on the flag displays the union of the Anglos and the French, the English and Irish and Scottish, who underwent an ethnogenesis into this new ethnicity of Anglo-Canadian, and then the French element. And they thought that was too exclusionary, and so they had to
Yeah.
get rid of it.
And when I mentioned before, sort of we're speaking of an ethnogenesis, about how you would create a people in Canada, it was with the understanding that despite being Anglos, my family can trace its roots back many, many generations. We're not British. Even though you walk around Ontario, almost every fucking second street's named Loyalist, this or that.
Hmm.
But there's an Anglo genetics there, but you're not British. You're a new thing,
That's right.
just like the Quebecois are a new type of thing, and so are African Americans, for that matter.
Yeah.
Like it or not, they're like a distinctly American entity, and
Yes.
that must be reckoned with.
Yeah. They themselves are this weird conjoining of a whole bunch of different West African groups that sort of just intermingled in the New World.
And also, like, I think even like the darkest black person in America is like a quarter white. Like, most
Mhm.
of them are mixed in some sense at some point with white genetics. It's very
That's right.
rare to see that. So that fucking matters when compared to another African.
Hmm.
I'm just pointing that out, and then wow, the lighter skinned ones seem to rise to the top. Like, there's an intra caste system
Hmm.
within the black community that, if you're not into looking into black culture, you wouldn't know anything about that. But because I'm a sick man. I know a lot about black culture, and I just like hip hop too.
I
So
find it, it's funny. I find it interesting too, and the history of Black nationalism is also kind of neat because you've got the like total exclude people who want total separation, and then the people who are fighting for rights. And I remember there was this like big debate between what's his name, something Dubois, who was this integrationist who fought for rights, and then the opposite guy was Marcus Garvey. and Marcus Garvey wanted them all to go back to Africa and build something new that was distinctly for them. And
They've
he
been
would
trying to build
ferry,
Wakanda for like 50
yeah.
years.
Well, that's what Liberia is. Liberia was Wakanda, and then I shit you not, Liberia was literally explored, colonized, and settled by African Americans.
That was one
And
of the great Vice documentaries. They did like two early on that I think probably did more damage to the black community than
yeah,
interracial rape rates.
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. So like the what was it? Anyway, after 100 years, the indigenous Africans just rose up and killed all the African Americans, and then it underwent the 6 Way Civil War, and now it is the way it is today.
Moving, we can get bogged down in black people for so long, but I
True.
want that there's a few articles I wanted to touch on that cause some, well, as the British say, controversy. Um, Oh, oh, sorry. There's Mark Trouble here. Still waiting on Akonville. Yeah, I followed
Yes.
up on that recently too.
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, Akon, uh, famous singer, looks kind of like a fucked up looking face, like Seal, from what I recall. But he made bank from having a couple
Oof.
big hits, and then also, like he kind of technically discovered Lady Gaga, so he was just making residuals off her. He took all this money
Hmm.
and wanted to start Akon City. Let me just see if I can even pull this up. He said I'm gonna get $1 billion and start start Wakanda in Africa, and he has all these schematics. He had really bad 3D renderings and everything. And you hear that, you think, wow, it certainly costs more than $1 billion to make a city, right? Like what would Pittsburgh cost to make? And I'm talking Pittsburgh. Road, sewage, out of nothing, out of just barren land, more than $1 billion. But he's talking about like we're gonna have renewable energy skyscrapers and like a fucking hover train. And so I guess Africans bought into it, but everyone else just watch some kind of scheme. Everyone's like, I know this is a scheme. I don't know what type of scheme it is though.
Hmm.
Maybe they got different schemes in Africa, but I think I don't know what's being laundered. It must be something, right? But I don't know.
Hmm.
And he said the whole city is also going to use a special cryptocurrency called A
Right.
coin. So it's like, oh, he's starting his own like rug pull within his own city. How the
What is
fuck does
this?
that work?
This reminds me of the what was it? There was like a bunch of like dark enlightenment tech bros wanted to build a city state or something where the currency would be crypto or something to that effect in the Mediterranean. Do you remember this? Do you remember what I'm
Um,
talking about? It's kind of like the black version of that. It almost sounds like that.
let me just hold on. I'm trying to share the screen here. Okay. Just going to start face to face Africa. Africa has its own website, if you can believe it. All right,
Wow.
so 6 billion future. Still, look at these buildings, these renderings. Pan African city in Senegal to begin next year, holding up
Jesus.
chains. I assume for slavery reasons. Not entirely sure why. Um, Black people see chains and just start holding them up. They think that's like something important. Anyway, this is what the city was supposed to look like a
Hmm.
Ridley Scott CGI sort of thing. Not clear how people are supposed to inhabit this. See, I don't know how people are supposed to live in this fucking thing.
Uh,
Anyway, so I said I wouldn't just get bogged down in this.
yeah, no, we're doing it anyway. It's fine. It's fine.
I wanted to
So,
talk about. Let me just pull this one up here. This this was an image that caused like
oh
bit.
no.
So because this touches on what we were just talking about.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and I think people they see this image and they go, "Hey now," but I think once you read it,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
not as
I
sensationalist
was
as other.
not I was not meant to this was not an attack piece. I was not tearing down Christians. I was not trying to offend Christians. I very specifically singled out a very exclusive cohort here. I was not saying, "Hey, my Christian brothers, you're all this." I was like, "No, like," and I mean, it was also a response article to somebody. Like I was responding to somebody else who is insufferable.
So this
But
image is never not
yeah,
funny to
yeah,
use.
it was
This
a
is
catchy.
always a
I was
great
like, you know what, this
image.
is perfect. This is a catchy image.
Yeah, I love this shit. I'm never gonna get tired of Jax. I don't care. I'm gonna laugh at this till the day I fucking die. I don't even need to know the context. It's like this is what's so great about these images. It's like you see them, you're like I immediately get what this is, you know? Um sorry. Okay. Fortissax is gone. He might have cut out there. I thought that was just me. All right. So what do we got here? Okay, so I'm just going to keep talking. He's probably going to join back up in just a second here. Let me just check the. Okay, we got clown emojis. Clown emojis. Here we go. Now you're going to feel sorry for those clown emojis in a second. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
They're clowning me in the chat.
That's a Jeet last name. That's a Jeet name.
Yeah, Varun. Okay, is this one of your
Right.
guys who hates you?
Yes. You see, I am known among the Jeets in Canada as the Jeet Destroyer. And because one in particular, there's a Canadian personality who goes by, what is it? Frontier Jot. He claims that he's a fifth generation Sikh. Despite that, he supports Khalistan and against Canada, and that yeah, he's got problems. So anyway, that blew up because I told him, I'm like, actually 92% of you came to Canada after the year 1980, so you don't have history here. Only 1.25% of you came here before 1960, if you want to go back even further. So you're not Canadian, you never will be. You're an interloper, you're foreign interlopers. And we're going to give the Hanuman statue the Boniface treatment one day, actually.
Well, you know what? So maybe it's a good time to just move on to this because I wanted to talk about this, and I
Mhm.
thought we could segue to it. But thankfully, the India race showed up. So I just banned this guy just because he was spamming the same shit over and over again. But if
Good.
there are Indians who want to show up and not spam, you are welcome. Um, but one of the things that happened to you recently was you've jumped in both feet first into something that we've been dealing with as well because we had published, or I rather had published, an article on the radical dose
Mhm.
a while ago, trying to, for an international audience,
You
explain to them what was going on over here.
you beat me to that. I wanted to do an article. I was going to call it The Brown Tide, but you beat me. You beat me to it.
Well, I would welcome you to do it because there's so much that I didn't cover. I was trying to just write a primer with as many sources as I could to sorry, sorry, I don't know why
Hello.
it keeps
No,
kicking you out,
it's
but
it's
sure.
it's probably just my internet. It's all good.
Oh, it's okay. I'll just keep adding you back. That's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we both had just been explaining to people what's going on because it sounds sudden and crazy that it seems that everyone from fucking libs to the far right to conservatives, everyone is openly talking about the problem we're having with mass migration from India. People are circulating photos of fucking Indians defecating everywhere, and they do, especially where I'm at in Ontario. Like this is a real fucking problem that we have, and it's just like an open thing you can discuss now. Which, if you had told me that
hmm
5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you.
No, as I like to say, and as I have said on X too, like 5 years of East Indian immigration destroyed 70 years of pro multicultural propaganda.
Yeah, and because what we were talking about on the show before was trying to ensure that the people who are openly talking about this one problem can understand that it applies to other groups as well. This is just the most blatant, right? This is just the most, oh, there's shit where there didn't used to be shit anymore. Or, it's very apparent that cities like Brampton and elsewhere, they're building giant. I think even the Ferryman's Toll, who we're both familiar with, he had who's
Yes.
affiliated with the Diagolon group and Jeremy McKenzie. I just saw he posted a photo in, I believe it's Brampton, not
Yeah.
far from where we're at in Ontario, and they built a giant monument to some strange half-naked monkey god of theirs. I don't know the
Yeah.
name, but
Yep.
it's like, oh yeah, you would only see that in a place where they're the majority. They start building these
Yes.
fucking crazy statues.
And I'm not sure the exact stats. The last time I checked, Brampton is 82% South Asian. but it might also be 53 with the rest of it just being foreign. But either way, Brampton is only like 17 or 20% Canadian. It's one of the least Canadian cities in the country. And this is a problem because the population of that city is 750,000.
And what's interesting is for people who don't know, it's actually pretty simple and easy to tell when a city or a town has been overtaken by Indians because it's a strange phenomenon with Indian guys. You'll get four of them, 4 to 5 of them together of the men, and they just kind of stand around like NPCs in a video game, but like an
Yeah.
old video game like Omicron or something, where they don't have their paths figured out. So they don't have any good AI. So you just see them milling around, staring. It's you're not used to seeing that.
No.
You're used to seeing even black guys. They're on their way to do something. Indians are just hanging out everywhere.
Yeah, it's been surreal, honestly. Like we're Canadians are reaching levels of xenophobia that I didn't even think were possible, and it's only accelerating every single day. The more this type of thing gets exposed, the more the open defecation, like that photo of the guy taking a shit in front of Tim Hortons. I almost feel like if the Tim Hortons sign wasn't in the background, Canadians wouldn't feel as bad about it. But
Yeah, and you're getting
there's
Canadians who aren't used to talking about this now
no,
talking about it.
no, no.
Actually, speaking of the Ferryman's Toll, I don't have it in front of me, but he had posted a very interesting series of clips from, I believe it was like where would it have been, Facebook or something. It was showing the transition of this one example of like a lib,
Yes.
what they
Oh yeah.
posted on Facebook last year versus what they're posting
And it's
now.
it's where, you know, they will not divide us, the elites are trying to separate us and make us fight. And then like the actual screenshot he shared is them reposting like
Hitler
greatest story
speeches.
never. Yeah. It's just insane, right? It's like we're witnessing radicalization in real
Yeah,
time
I'll just
very
read it here
quickly.
because I have it on Telegram, but it's like, yeah, they literally divide people forever. That's all they've ever done. Without the powers that be using their media control, we're all the same. And then flash forward to now, it's like Hitler, My Struggle, parts 1 and 2.
And it's real, right? And these are the conversations that Canadians are having now. It's like actually they're repulsive. I want them gone. I
Yeah, and so one thing, and we could probably dig in here and spend a while, but one thing that I see with people is that they're not used to talking about this, like I said, and it's very easy to kind of branch off into the reasons why. Like, I don't want to say anything about these people. I want to blame the government for allowing them to come here, but then also the NGOs for enticing them here, and also academia for making
Mhm.
money off it. There actually are a lot of culprits involved in this, and that's
Yes.
why I mentioned in the Vanguard, the sorry, Radical Dose article. I'm like, yes, that's all true. However, always return to that fundamental core problem, which is I just don't like them here. That's
Yes.
it. And you actually don't need to justify that.
That's right.
Don't be confronted with hostile logic from an enemy saying, well, if you feel that way, then you must feel this way. It's like, no, just, you know what? I
I
remember a
just
time when
don't
this
like them.
this I remember a time when this wasn't the case. I prefer that time. That's it. You don't need to justify yourself otherwise. And all the other
No.
stuff is practical and something needs to be addressed, but don't forget that you're allowed to feel this way about your fucking country.
My piece, Give Hate a Chance, was literally about this. It was just don't like them. It doesn't require an explanation.
Yeah, and you can list the reasons because it's like that they're also kind of hostile to you, and they like there's 1,000 different reasons, and
Yeah.
unlike with African Americans, there's no complicated history. This
No.
shit just happened
40
within
years.
my adult life. There was like 3 years where they weren't here, and then they were. This is sudden, so you're allowed to be like, this is jarring. I've whiplash from this demographic replacement
And
that I'm seeing.
I think that's partly why it's yeah, I think that's why it's the radicalization is happening so quickly, right? Because the demographic makeup of the country happens so fast and we're not as I always like to say, Canada is a crossroads between the old world and the new. We're somewhere between British and American, but we're not as polite as the British are. And I'm I'm noticing Canadians rally to action more and their responses are more aggressive and openly so than you might see in the European continent over this whole thing, especially because it happens so quickly.
Well, I was in a chat with a Joel Davis, which is interesting, and he had made a point about how one might rally the Australian, because the Australian man is made of different stuff than maybe the British man. I would say the Canadian is the same way. There's a bit more ruggedness. There's a bit more, I don't want to call it outdoorsiness, but there's like to get
Hmm.
the Canadian and the Australian man fired up. I think you need to be a bit harder, a bit more direct,
Yes.
a bit more angry and violent, frankly, if you just use those words. But his point was, you don't really entice people with like a bunch of eggheads and suits.
No.
A lot of speeches like that.
No, not in Canada. But yeah, before we were sidetracked by the Jeet invasion, which yet is afflicting us even in this live stream. You wanted to, I believe, you wanted to cover, what was it?
Oh yeah, the spiteful mutant Christians. But I do want to just if we have the time, I would like
Mhm.
to just spend a bit more time on the recent. You've been in some debates. You've been on Twitter and elsewhere, like, and you've been
Yeah.
attracted a lot of Indian users kind of coming against you. And we saw one in the chat here. But I'm wondering if you'd like to talk a bit about that. Like, what sort of arguments have you been seeing? What's that like? Do you get a sense of where they're coming from? Are they organized in a way and they're like directing people towards you?
So, I mean, I've had a few posts on X that were probably mass reported. It seems that X does a fairly good job at suspending or blocking accounts that do that. So, like, you have to remove tracking links. It's not that hard, but a lot of people don't know that. But you have to remove tracking links. You have to be very careful um, with how you repost certain things or where you share them. So I've had a few posts that were mass reported, and they tried to get my account suspended a number of times. But I spent some time about a month or two ago in a lot of Twitter spaces with a lot of East Indians, and of the things that I'm hearing them say is just repetitive libtard mythology. The story of Canada that they've been fed is essentially, we're a nation of immigrants. Everybody got here yesterday just like them. This place materialized out of thin air, and that they have every right to be here just like we are. But simultaneously, they will say things like, we're replacing you, we're taking all of your jobs. All of your people have no culture. We see you're all junkies in the streets. You're all useless. Canadians are
They say
poor,
that a
and
lot. It's
yeah,
video games and drugs, even though if you know anything about Indians, like they're obsessed with porn and video games and
yes.
drugs.
And they'll, what they like to do too is they try to bring up they'll try to say, oh, Canadians are pedophiles, or they'll try to say Westerners are pedophiles, and you can easily refute this. You can respond with Indian rape statistics from the government of India that say that every 17 minutes a woman is reported raped in
Oh,
that
you want to hear
country,
a funny story
right? And
about
it's
that?
just like, yeah.
Okay, so I'm taking great pains not to reveal too much information because this does involve my wife and her job. But let's say a few years ago, she works in marketing like I do,
Mhm.
and she had a client, one of many clients, but this client, they were a nonprofit, and their whole purpose was to fight child sex trafficking around
Mhm.
the world, right? Run campaigns, raise awareness, very top level awareness raising stuff. Not really with like tasked with rescuing them, just like let people know that it's wrong, because there's a lot of countries that don't know that's wrong.
Mhm.
The only country that she dealt with that just stonewalled her and wouldn't let them run their campaigns was India.
Yes.
India is notorious for having the worst rape statistics, even maybe worse than Africa in certain countries in Africa. Like it's really, really bad
It's
per
extremely
capita.
bad. Yeah.
What I'm saying is the governments, because you could say, oh, that's the peasants, that's the untouchables, that's the lower caste stuff. No, 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 no. The government bureaucrats and their leaders also refused to acknowledge that there was a problem. They were getting this was going to be free. Like, we're going to come in here, let us run some ads. We'll pay it. This is a free fucking thing you get. We'll do it in
Mhm.
your language with your, demographics. And they said, fuck you.
Yeah.
So this don't ever get it twisted that this isn't at the highest fucking levels of their intelligentsia. They're
Correct.
denying, and this is what I see with, not to make a big thing of this, with most non-white groups. I find white people, Europeans, are the only ones that have ever admitted that that pedophilia is bad, and that B, we need to root it out and address it. Everyone else seems to do it way worse, and they just don't talk about it, and so they can pretend that because we're the only ones talking about it, we're the only ones that do it. So I'm always holding these two thoughts. I'm like, do they believe this, or are they being disingenuous? Or
Mhm.
maybe it's both. I sometimes I think it is both, and because they're so fucking dumb, they don't know that they're being hypocritical too.
So a number of my threads and posts that also went viral are ones that actually break down the Statistics Canada data itself. Because you'll, like I said, there's a personality named Frontier Jot, and he's like, "Well, I'm a fifth generation Sikh, and my family's been in Canada for 130 years." And I'm like, let me plug that into Chat GPT 4.0, and let's break down the actual numbers here. Oh, that's interesting. 92% of Indians came after 1980. 92% who are currently alive in Canada. Oh, that's interesting. Only 1.25% of all Sikhs in Canada right now go back to before 1960. So, and disregarding that, right? Like, even if that wasn't the case, you're telling me that after 5 generations, you're opposing Canadian ethnic nationalism because you don't identify with it, because you identify with Punjab? You're just proving my point. Go home. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
that's true. And I will say that over time, I'm in my 30s. I've really aged like a fine wine into a true retard, because I used to get caught up in the Sikh stuff. I used to be like, oh, well, they're the good ones, but then they're these bad ones. But then I realized I know entirely too much about Indian nonsense. I said the same
mhm.
thing about gay people. I shouldn't know what a twink is. None of us should. None of us should know what a power bottom is. We use too much of this shit. It's corrupted our brains. I don't want to know what a sheik is. They're like, oh, this is a ceremonial dagger. You know what?
Yeah,
It's stupid, and I don't want to know it anymore. Because I know more about this than I know about the Acadians, than
yeah,
I know more
yes,
about, any of these really fascinating. Tell me more about the migration of the French to New Orleans and back.
yeah.
Why don't we have more Cajun shit up here? I need to know the history of that. We could have had jambalaya this whole time. We didn't. Why? I don't want to know about the gayest knife on earth that you carry around.
I don't want to know why you're using Canada as a springboard to launch your little separatist revolution. I don't want to know who Hanuman is. I don't want to care about, you know what I mean? And it's just, yeah, you're having your little civil war that I'm now roped into. I shouldn't know what a Rajasthani is. I shouldn't know what a Gupta is. I shouldn't know what a Tamil is. I shouldn't know what all of your ethnic groups, your major ethnic groups are. I shouldn't know that India is a country with 13 national languages, and the
Yeah,
only one to unify them is English, right?
it was funny
Like,
when I was in many years ago, in my early 20s. I was working in a restaurant in Toronto, and I was in the kitchen, and like a couple of the kitchen staff and one of the dishwashers, they were all like Sri Lankan, they were Tamils, and then there was some intra-ethnic conflict going on in the fucking kitchen where like two of the guys were like Tamil tiger affiliate, something, they had like tiger tattoos, and the other guy wasn't, and I would just hear in some nonsense language that there's a feud, and then I had to know about this. I'm like, I don't want this anywhere, go away. Go
yeah.
put you both in that fucking pizza oven. I don't give a shit
And
about
you're
this.
and you're right too. You're right. And like I said, a part of my whole project is to build and restore and or create a rallying mythology for Canadians. I want Canadians to realize that they are a people, they're not a proposition. We exist, we've been here. And it has to be done. We can't just rely on British history. We can't just rely on American media to give us an identity. We have to be our own people, stand on our own two
Yeah.
legs.
See, I think now is the time for that, because we've said this many times before. I think that Indians are the trans of race. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Because transgenderism is sort of the question that liberalism couldn't answer. It's a conflagration of every not in modern culture. It doesn't make sense. It's a cancer, and liberalism can't address it. It can't say why that shouldn't exist, right? But everyone knows it shouldn't exist. Same thing
Hmm.
with Indians. Multiculturalists, Hey, look, everyone, everyone, everyone loves Chinese food. I get that you like sushi. I like sushi. There's been like tacos. Hey, I'm spiritually very Mexican. I'm not Mexican, but they're into like skulls and spooky shit. Like it seems like every day's Halloween. It's Halloween Town. Mexico is like Halloween Town from Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. I respond very positively to that. However, I do believe that India and Indians are the culture that represent like the trans problem. Like everything about this culture just sucks.
Yes,
You
there's
can't
no
you can't pretend that any of it's good. It stinks. It's goofy. Yeah, and you need to you can't keep lying that this food is good. The food's not good. If you think
no.
Indian food's good, you're actually wrong. I've had Indian food from all over. I've had the best Indian food, and it is a low tier food. I'm telling you.
20 minutes before the show, I put out a piece. It's a very short piece based on an engagement that I had today on X, and it's literally about this subject. It is,
Congratulations.
yeah. No, it's just it's pertinent. It's pertinent to this because you said like one, the food's not even good. But the other thing is that the argument that they use that the multiculturalists use, they're like, oh, what about the food? And it's like, okay, what does your love of sushi have to do with Africans?
Yeah, yeah.
What does your love of sushi have to do with Indians or sub-Saharan Africans, North Africans, Islamists? It has nothing to do with that. And it's used as a cudgel. It's used as a battering ram to sneak that in there.
Yeah. So you need to like Indians are going to make the liberal realize that maybe we're not so multicultural anymore. What
Right.
is the this is weird. I don't like it. Every white chick can pretend that she got some beads from a shaman. But look, we got beads at home. We got beads in Canada. You don't need
Yeah.
these beads.
White people's idea of multicultural food is literally just Chinese, Japanese, Indian, and like that's it.
You know what?
That's
When I went to New York recently, we were in Manhattan, staying in the heart of Manhattan, and we got a few restaurants. I just opened up DoorDash because I want something delivered to the hotel. Like, okay, what's in the area? What's we can order from? And I was really stricken by the dearth of options in a like the most urban place in the world. Because you look at it, and if Toronto's the same thing, I look and I'm like, okay, sushi place, Thai place, sandwich place, Jewish place that cost $40 American for a fucking pastrami sandwich
Oh,
below me. And it's like it's actually the same shit you get in every
yeah,
fucking city. You got
yeah.
the hits. Ironically, Toronto might have a better food scene than Manhattan, but don't you didn't hear that from me.
Interesting.
There's just weirder shit there. Anyway, but I'm like, this is all like the same shit. It's and we're doing it for so long. You could get like white kids to make this. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
we figured it out. We figured out pasta. We don't need no doing no, we don't need brown people to make brown food. We can figure it out.
Mhm.
We can all do chicken fried rice. I don't know where I'm going with this. I lost the thread of what I was talking about. We were complaining about Indians.
Yes, which unfortunately is a regular occurrence now in Canada. It comes up every day. You got to talk about Indians.
Hey, we wouldn't be on this if an Indian didn't show up here.
That's right. Literally proof right there. Proof of concept. There's your
I
receipt.
I want to do what you do because I want to jump into more spaces and just start
It's
causing a stink.
Oh, it's fun. It's so fun. You get into a space, no one, first of all, no one has any idea what they're talking about. You get a bunch of Indians going up against some kind of normie con, sort of neocon patriot conservative. Well, Canada's, you got to come, you got to assimilate to our Canadian values. And you get those types. You go in there and then you just dominate. If you have any basic knowledge of Canada's history, Canadian history, or who we are as a people, you just go and you dominate. And every time someone says, "Well, actually, we're a country of immigrants," you just plow through them, and then you pretty much dominate the space. Anybody in the distant right in the Canadian sphere goes into a Twitter space, they end up dominating. It's
It's
impossible to not
crazy
happen.
how well you can do in Canada if you have even just one first principle. Because every like your average conservative is in Canada, much like they are in America. They're always hemming and hawing. It's hard to get them to commit on a single value other than that they hate fascism.
Mhm.
If any value that they truly grasp onto will be indistinguishable from a liberal value. But so if it's just them, and you can just walk in the room with your fucking cock and balls out and just dominate. You can show
And
up drunk.
there was what was I got into it with an indigenous girl, an indigenous woman who was in these spaces, and she verbatim said, "Canada is a nation of immigrants. You stole this land." I'm just like, you're a conservative. Not only do you not know anything about this country, but you're a conservative, and you may not like Indians, but you're throwing this at me. The absolute state of the Canadian mainstream right? It's just like, man. But no, you go in there, you dominate. And you're right, it's first principles. They've got nothing. Their principles are liberalism from 2002. That's it.
You know, anytime I hear an argument like that, I've been so poisoned by online discourse. I don't even know how to argue those points anymore. Like, Canada's a nation of immigrants. I go, nah. And and they say, no, it is. I'm like, hey, where'd you read that? The wrong ass shit store. And
Yeah,
I'd break. I don't know. I can't do it. I can't.
the thing with spaces, like any other online debate, is that you're not doing it for the people you're debating against. You're doing it for anyone who's listening.
I
You're
know.
doing it. You're
Yeah.
you're doing it for the onlookers. You're doing it for the onlookers who are undecided. They're not sure what they actually think, and they don't. A lot of times, they just don't know. And you end up having a lot of reach that way.
Yeah, and if, to the make a serious point, never underestimate, and this will sound pretentious, but never underestimate how ignorant most people are to these basic points. Like, we're used to them. We've hashed this out amongst ourselves in our spaces 100 different fucking ways, but most people have never heard this stuff before, phrased and framed in a way that is, not expressed in a schizophrenic way, because some people, when they do
Mhm.
speak on these topics, will be a bit too angry and
Yes.
a bit too kind of bombastic with it. But there's a lot of people who've literally never heard this stuff before, and it's like
No.
seeing the light for the first time.
Exactly right, and you're right. I think you frame it very nicely when you say that, and a lot of that is by design, right? A lot of it is they were deliberately kept ignorant. They just simply don't know, and if they did know, they wouldn't support what they do, or they wouldn't be arguing against what they are. And so it's important to have people going out there and just spitting out the facts.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, for people who've never done this before, especially if you're dealing with progressives or liberals, and people you care about, people in your family, friends, who you have a connection to, and you don't want to just get into it with them all the time. I find asking questions and leaving them with questions does more long term. Like, ask them questions, send them away with that. Okay, Canada's a nation of immigrants. I'm like, well, at what point does a group stop being an immigrant group? Is there an amount of time? And what is that amount of time?
Hmm.
Go think about that. Think about that. Come back later. Let's talk about that. And maybe they'll give you a number like, oh, maybe after like 3, 4 generations. I'm like, okay, so after 3 generations, but you can work with that, and you got to like
Yes.
send them away, keep, and they'll eventually mull it over enough where they'll come around to your way of thinking. But it's like a 15-step process a lot of these times. And some people I hate. Look, I I lose my temper as much as anyone. One example is, fuck, anytime you've seen like especially like a white family where their son, daughter was killed by usually like a black or brown person, and they
Hmm.
say this is not about race. Like, this is the last thing. And actually, I love these. Like, they go out of their way to express their gratitude for the group that killed their children more than expressing their own grief.
Hmm.
And like, it's hard for me to figure out how to communicate with that person. But maybe there is. Maybe I'm just not cut out for it. But I
Yeah.
do think there's, and we talk about this on the show too. Um, and I don't know the exact breakdown of this, but I do think, especially with us, with our group, like white guys, there's separating the wheat from the chaff. Like,
Hmm.
not everyone can be saved. Not everyone can be reached. We're going through a genetic bottleneck right now. There's a non insignificant amount of people who seem to have a death spiral that they're in for their own bloodlines, for their own self preservation and survival. I'm like, well, there's a point where I just got to let you, reap those consequences, and that sounds harsh, but,
Well, no, I mean it's also realistic. You can't save everybody. You can save the people that are workable, that are salvageable, that can offer something that can help everybody else. But at some point, you gotta tribe
yeah.
up.
All right. So we can move back to spiteful mutant Christians. Let me just get this going here. because we had a good thing going with that
It's
image.
not as mean. It's not as mean as people think it
It's not
is.
what you're thinking is, but yeah. So similar to the Indian thing, these are people that you've talked to, that you've had a direct
Yes.
interaction with, that inspired some writing. You similarly had some direct involvement with these Christians, and you were saying this is the specific type that I don't like. If you'd like to just kind of summarize that.
Yeah. So the this is the type of person who I remember if you were around in 2015, because like you, Dimes, like I'm an old head. I've been on the online right for a very long time, probably I'd say 13 or 14 years now. And back around 2014, 2015, there were a lot of these trad cath guys. There were a lot of these dudes who were very recent converts to Christianity and Catholicism, and they would run these massive meme pages with very disparaging, very ignorant statements and themes about European history, and all of it is just very basically refuted, right? And so this person was essentially that I was responding to was gloating about the destruction of paganism, was gloating about the destruction of European history, essentially, without knowing anything about it. So I spent the first paragraph saying like, listen, this is a very specific cohort of person. I'm not targeting Christians. Christians are my friends. But this particular person is ignorant and they should not be tolerated. They're dangerous. Um, so they will say things like paganism didn't invent anything but a couple of longboats, and it's like, that's a real head scratcher there. Uh, Modern plumbing quite literally comes from the Romans. Bathhouses come from the Romans. The Romans had vending machines in their apartment buildings that shops were positioned on the bottom floor of, right? It's just like just easily refuted stuff like that, right? But there's no connection. There's no connection between them mentally there. Between like, yeah, there was this whole ass civilization that was a high culture, that was literate, that had an organized state religion that happened to not be Christian, and all of that existed before this. But these people don't know that. They don't know that, and then they disparage the whole shebang with and they were trying to correlate what was it, European paganism with um, the mock child sacrifice of Bohemian Grove and like the whatever weird occultist rituals that American degenerate elites in California do or something. So I
Yeah,
was just like,
I was gonna say
go ahead.
that's one thing that I don't like engaging in these discussions that make your ancestors absolute boneheads up until a certain point. And
Right.
one area of investigation we've always found really fascinating is even Paleolithic history, and we covered one book. The name escapes me, but basically the argument sort of like what Graham Hancock does, which is that human
Mhm.
beings were a lot more advanced a lot earlier than they're given credit for,
Yes.
and our ancient ancestors were capable of a lot more than you might think. They weren't just, blind savages wandering and knocking into each other. So
Right.
that's also where I come from.
So the conclusion to that piece was basically like, if you're the type of person who disparages your ancestors because of some perceived savagery or because of some perceived behavior or activity, you're really like, that is the same impulse in leftists. Leftists look upon their history of colonialism and slavery and they think that that's bad. They think it's something they ought to be destroyed. They want to destroy idols. They want to destroy texts. They want to erase that history in some misguided attempt to correct it, right? I find that disparaging your history, whether it's Christian or pagan, is very much that same impulse, and that's what I was coming after this person for. I was like, you're doing the same thing leftists are. That's what a spiteful mutant is. A spiteful mutant hates their history and culture. A spiteful mutant wants to destroy historical artifacts and pieces that are a part of you that can never be ripped apart from you, frankly. Uh,
And there's one thing that's I'm going to get to the Odyssey comments in just a second here, but I wanted to say that's one thing that I found really fascinating about Michael Jones's work, especially that book Logos Rising, because he's coming from a very staunchly Catholic perspective, written a great deal on theology and a great many other topics, but in that
mhm,
book specifically, he was making the argument that the what would you might call it, like not the innovation but like the lightning bolt of the concept of Christian logos could only be the stage for that could only be set by everything that preceded it. That
Right.
humanity was not ready to understand God at such a higher level until it kind of went through all of these prehistoric and pagan, even if I'm not trying to say that this is something you necessarily believe in, but I'm like, he at least gives credit to everything that was pre-Christian because you could
Yes.
not have arrived at the understanding of modern Christianity without the innovations of the Greeks or the innovations
Correct.
of the Romans and whatnot.
Correct. And I would even say that this is a whole other ball game. I don't want to get too deep into it. Um, I think that the conclusions of the Hellenists in the late Roman Empire were correct. The convergence towards um, monism, the convergence towards a universal religious view metaphysically. I think that that was inevitable. I think that that would have happened regardless of whether Christianity existed or not. My disagreement comes from is the conclusion Christianity? No, I don't think so. But there was that convergence. There was a building up to something in my view that was going from this that could not have happened unless there was a pre-existing civilization, unless there was pre-existing development, right? It doesn't just come out of nowhere. We didn't just one day see the light and then, all these things happen after the fact.
I just want to quickly just talk about some Aussie comments here. We've got Trad Dad, who's always been in the comments, always leaving cool things. As American, know very little about Canadian history. We actually had a
Hmm.
super chat here that was and one mango chutney. I don't know exactly what that was in reference for, but it's probably during the Indian segment. Sorry, I didn't get to it in time. Trad Dad also says weasels, women, and homos are obviously at the reins. Men entering the public arena again could balance this madness out in no time. What state of decline will it take to incite us is the question.
Hmm.
Maybe next time has left some good ones here. I don't know about monotheism or polytheism. Monotheism is easy for the masses. He's got some good stuff in there. I just wanted to make sure that we paid attention to the Aussie chat. We have a lot of
Yeah,
longtime viewers on there.
yeah, that's good.
So yeah, just going back to this.
Oh, right, and so I gave a bunch of examples of how how actually civilized the largest religion in the Western world was before Christianity, which was Hellenism, and it was a state religion. It had a high priest that was employed by the government, right? And it would have many priests employed by the government. It had, maybe it didn't have a unifying doctrine, but it was halfway there. It was close to it. And to Christians' credit, in this era, I would say that they mastered the technology of the written word. The written word had existed for a lot of people, but they mastered it in a way that allowed for the mass dissemination of their ideas in a way that prior, more primitive organized religions could not do. You covered that in Empire and Communication, actually, on the Blood Satellite show. You discussed those concepts in that book. But my point was that there was something going on here. It wasn't a bunch of guys sacrificing goats in the woods, right? It wasn't like that. There were priests, there were priestesses, there were official religious services. It wasn't just primitive savagery, and it was wrong for the person I was responding to just disparage our entire imperial Roman history with that.
And that was what was so interesting. And also, Minoan, let me know if my audio is a bit better now. I just cranked the audio on the mic, so because it was at maximum in the
Mm,
platform, but I just tried to turn that up. So, yeah, and that's what I was reading in that book, the New Nobility of Blood and Soil. Once again, speaking about pre-Christian Germany specifically, but the idea that it was, roving savages. It was a bit more interestingly enough, is more individualist, more egalitarian, maybe a bit
mhm,
more libertarian, even a bit more anarchic, but it was grounded in the homestead and the patriarchal family structure, and then the meeting place of the things. So they had some governance, but being a warrior landowner was kind of the status quo there,
mhm.
and they did this without a centralized state until eventually they did. But they did have their own
Yeah.
formations.
It's funny you mentioned that because the book on the Saxon Hellion that I'm actually reading in order to for my Christian vitalism project, they actually mention that the Saxons, when they were being invaded by the Franks to convert them, they didn't have a central authority, and this is why it was so difficult to stamp them out, because they would have a temporary war chief who would almost like the way the Greeks did, like the way the Athenians did, where they would rotate whoever was the chief in their war, whenever there was a conflict or something to that effect, to avoid this sort of over centralization of power. and the Saxons did that. Yeah, they rotated a chief. It was a very sort of libertarianish kind of society.
Now we got a question here from Oz Dark Maga. Straightforward question. So, what do you Fortissax believe in then? Probably a very big question, but
Hmm. Yeah, so I don't like labels. I don't like being pigeonholed into specific terms or affiliations. But I would say that I'm a Hellenic Neoplatonist. That's what I would say my beliefs are. That's what I would say what my religion is.
would there be a way to summarize that just for people who might not be familiar with that?
Yeah, so I believe in the Olympians. To the Romans, they were called the Dii Consentes. There's 6 male gods, 6 female gods. The head god is Zeus, and I believe that they're organized into a celestial hierarchy as laid out by Plotinus and Iamblichus, the Neoplatonist philosophers in the late Roman Empire.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Oz Dark Mag, I hope that answers your question. And I guess extending from that, does that kind of govern your everyday life? Or because I know in the pagan sphere there's a great many festivals and a great many people who have their rituals they engage in everyday
Mhm.
life. Does that sort of manifest in any unique ways in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a little altar. I try to do the regular thing. I'm not the most pious guy, but I do the little offerings and the little prayers here and there. I try to do my best to stay on that. It's as piety is a value, pietas, as the Romans said. So I wouldn't say it necessarily interferes with secular life or anything to that effect. But yeah, there's something going on there. But when I talk about the values too, like they say like the mos maiorum, which is the Romans believed in. It's very basic stuff. It's like believe in God, do your rituals, uh, you know, be disciplined, be diligent. Temperance is a virtue. You don't be a degenerate. Don't. It's stuff that you find in I would say in Christianity as well. It's nothing. Yeah, it's nothing unique. It's nothing that spectacular.
Yeah, and just to an earlier point you had mentioned about sort of the what would you call it? Sort of like the conquesting, like an inquisitionary form of Christianity that seems to grow
Mhm.
from online spaces. Because I remember, early 2000s ish, like after 9/11, certainly, but it was very popular, especially on 4chan, to
Yes.
adopt Catholic imagery as an anti-Islam sentiment, and that was where the whole Deus Vult thing came from.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that I remember I'm like, okay, it kind of evolved from that as these people looking for a religious antidote to Islam and then carrying that forward to a religious warlike antidote to modernity, degeneracy, and things like that.
Yes. And to the credit of Christians, a lot of neo-pagan religions are fake and gay, and they have no antiquity, and they're not related to any historic European religion. They're all pretty much procured in the 1960s. If you want to go back any further, it's like the 1890s and the weird theosophic occult religions of people like Helena Blavatsky and stuff like that. So like there is some reasonable criticism, and they see this, the Christians, they look at this and they say, "Damn, this is fake and gay, and it's a product of degeneracy." So I get it. I understand where they're coming from, right? Like
Yeah,
it.
and also even within Christianity, like within the Catholic Church, it's very difficult because frankly, you're not supposed to go against the Pope. You're not supposed to criticize the Pope at all. You're never going to find any priests, despite their internal misgivings, they'll say anything about anything the Pope has said publicly on any issue. But there is a sentiment within Catholicism that something earlier must be reclaimed. Some pre-Vatican II version of Catholicism. But I think the same yearning exists in a lot of other within Protestantism as well.
Mhm.
And that kind of chases people into Eastern Orthodoxy from what I've seen. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I know like Jay
I,
Dyer was like that. Like he was a Catholic, then he kind of
yeah,
went to Eastern Orthodoxy, and that may be well and good. But
I
I
know a girl who just did that.
really,
Yeah.
so was it kind of what I was describing? Like it just wasn't extreme enough, or what do you think?
That's exactly that. And I guess they had been struggling as a Catholic for a long time. Like they've been Catholic for 12-ish years or something. And they just, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure about their motivations, but they did switch from Catholicism to the Orthodox Church in their area.
Yeah, and so what's interesting there is that even within the Catholic Church, the strongest adherents oftentimes seem to be backwards looking. I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but it's like similarly to paganism, like you're looking for something that's
Mhm.
outside the current iteration of whatever
Yes,
the fuck this is.
that's right.
And which isn't to criticize Catholicism or Christians or anything, but I don't know, it's just an interesting phenomenon taken up primarily by young people, I think. And
Yeah.
I would say young white people. I'm not sure if there's Mexicans having these conversations, even though within the Hispanic world, Christianity and also like folk paganism are both intensely popular, but they don't seem to have the critical nature that we do. And maybe that works against us. And that's something that we talk about too.
Yeah, it sucks, right? Because from an institutional basis, and I like to call it blue checkmark Christianity. Other people's call it regime evangelicalism. But you're caught between a rock and a hard place where your spiritual you have clear spiritual needs that have to be met, and you also have needs for a community, which traditionally would often be oriented around religion. But then you have this top-down institution all over the place globally that is pretty much in opposition to your existence, and
Y-
it sucks. And people are looking for a way out. They're looking for an
Yeah.
alternative.
And there's something in, let's call it the Western mind, but that usually just means the European mind that I think will always work against us. And it's our proclivity to always try and stand outside of ourselves and stand outside of whatever system we currently inhabit.
Hmm.
That's what makes us so predisposed to conspiracy theories. We're always, whatever it is, whatever system we're in, we're always trying to view it from the outside in a meta sense. We're a very meta people,
Hmm.
for better or worse. So even theologically, we're always trying to apply a strange sort of philosophical rationality to everything. Like, and this is, the argument made by even Eliade, Marcia Eliade, and Julian Jaynes and stuff. Like, we cannot believe in things to the capacity that we used to
Right.
in the ancient world. Like their relationship with spirituality was so immediate and so profound, and our brains just don't work that way. Even physiologically, they don't work that way. But
Right.
it's like we can. And this sounds very cynical. I'm trying not to sound cynical, but it's just a thing that we have to deal with. But it's like we can never fully believe in things. We're always kind of one foot out. And
Hmm.
that means we can, I don't know, like investigate things differently than most people, but we're never fully in anything.
Hmm.
And that's something I don't see getting better over time. Better, as if there's a value judgment, but I think it's going to get more extreme as technology kind of thrusts us into a sort of extra dimensional mind space. You know what I mean? Like we
Hmm.
live in very maddening times. So I don't even think we're capable of returning psychologically to these things. It has to be like a new version of it. Like some kind of schism seems to be happening. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. I would say that even believers, the few who yet remain, who are sincere theists, I think that even they struggle, because 300 years of Enlightenment liberalism has just changed the way we looked at things fundamentally. And it's like you said, it's very meta. We stand out. We look at culture. We don't participate in it. We're always critiquing our culture, but we're not doing the dances. We're not doing the ritual. You know, we're not doing. We make fun of these things as performative, but the thing is, you need meaning and the performance. It can't just, and it's true. It's a good thing to criticize the performative if there's nothing behind it, if there's no sincerity behind it. But you got
Yeah.
to have that. You got to have that convergence.
Yeah, and
And
that's what we talked about in that book, Decadence by Jim Haugen, which I loved so dearly. About, I always think about that story where he, Western journalist, this was in the 70s, but a Western journalist goes to, where the fuck was it? Ibiza.
mhm,
And he is there with the locals. He's in this island getaway, no phones, no fax machines, no nothing.
mhm,
And he looks at the locals and he finds that like he can't live his life like them. He can maybe do it for a couple days, but
Hmm.
they truly don't have an understanding of like work and responsibility like he did. And so, but he noticed he was always viewing himself and his relationship there in a like a meta way. Like he was always thinking about like the story of him there, which was not
Yeah.
a mental thing that they would do. Like the locals didn't engage in this like weird,
Right.
schizo. Behold here in the chat calls it a schizo analysis.
Schizoanalysis. I like that. Yeah.
True. Yeah, we talk about that all the time, but it's like that means that you can never really fully integrate with any ideology. And when I talked about, this is a dangerous topic to discuss, but the Protestant Reformation and its association with the Enlightenment and the rationalist movement, the schism between the Protestants and the Catholics is fascinating because you get this sense of Protestantism, for better or worse. And again, this isn't a value judgment, but as like a distinctly European interpretation, not just European, Anglo, like an Anglo interpretation
Right.
of Christianity, which is a bit more rational. I don't mean rational as in like rational versus irrational or smart versus crazy, but like a rational inquiry into like the nature of God, less about ritual, less about history, more about the individual and the individual's direct relationship with God. Some
Hmm.
people say it's better, some people say it's worse. I'm not getting into that, but that is what the schism was. It was like a schism based on the character of the people themselves. And you can imagine a similar schism happening now. And it's such a bewildering thing to imagine because this is like sort of a black swan event. You can never really predict it. You can never forecast
No.
these well, but it does feel like there's enough intellectual, upheavals going on that you could imagine some kind of, I don't know, religious schism happening, a new form of Christianity. Maybe that's already happened, or some kind of new paganism or a fusion of the two.
Yeah.
And some people would say like, who gives a shit about any of this? Hey, I hear you, but I think this speaks to the character of the people as well.
Yes. And I've always, I don't, I don't think that political Christianity is a winning solution. I don't think it's actually going to succeed. But I similarly don't believe that any kind of pagan group is going to succeed. There's not going to be a mass unification on a religious basis. If there is anything of the sort, it's going to be some new religion, or it's going to be some crazy reformation of Christianity that includes I don't know, all these other elements that are pushing them in a specific direction today. I don't think it's going to be a return to the past. As I like to tell the trads, you're not going to have your sixth great awakening. The collective masses of the Western world are not going to fall on one knee and accept Christ into their heart. It's not happening. You already had a religious Christian awakening, or rather, a secularized heresy of a Christian great awakening, and that's what wokeism is. Wokeism is your latest rendition of that. So what I see is instead an age of shattering. I see an age of, I don't know, socio-religious tribes uh, that may be rectified with some unifying new thing that I can't predict. Frankly, I
Yeah, it'd probably be some strange version of transhumanism because that seems to be a very timely question presented. Like you need to make a
mhm,
religious reason why not transhumanism,
right,
and so why not have it so someone can live to be 500 years. And we talked about this before, how you need to
yeah,
essentially be on the side of death, which is a strange argument to make. But I wanted to just mention something before, and we probably got to get going soon. But I forget where was this? Was this in Revolt of the Public as well? I think it is. Where or might have been Square in the Tower. I forget, but it was the line was something like, if you go back to during the War of the Religions, like the true war between the Protestants and the Catholics, bring that person to the present day, and they ask you, well, who won?
yes,
Who
yeah,
won between the Protestant and Catholics? Well, no one won. They're still here, but it's this sort of like two planets caught in a strange. It's like the three body problem or something,
mhm,
where like, okay, that caused the schism that chased Protestants over to America, and then the Catholics kind of came to America later on and took over. And though it like they're both here, they're both kind of still fighting, but they formed a sort of like a double helix right now about around this sort of idea of modern Christianity. But you know what I mean? Like it's a
Yeah.
hybridization of a former schism moving
Yes.
forward through time. You're like, well, that's a strange way to view it, but that is what it is. Like they didn't win. And also, I'm always coming back to Nick Land's piece called Canon Wars and this idea of what is the Western canon? Well, the Western canon, the canon of writing, is that which defines the Western, let's say, European character. And there's a lot of things in there. The idea is when something is in the canon, it can never be removed.
Right.
So, what works might you find in there? Well, Shakespeare would be one. You're never going to remove Shakespeare, even to the point where if you removed Shakespeare reading from high schools where it's usually read, there's so much Shakespeare in our culture, in our storytelling. You can never remove
Right.
that Shakespearean essence from what we talk about. Then there's other books that you can never surgically remove them. So the irony is that the Bible, the King James Bible, would be in there, but so would Charles Darwin, so would On
Yes.
the Origin of Species. You can never excise that from the Western character. And that we return back to what we said at the beginning. It was like hypocrisy seems to exist. And I can't explain it. But if you look at the Western character, Lord of the Rings is probably in there too. There's a
Yeah.
few things, but
Yeah.
what is there cannot really be removed. It's like the
Right.
soul of your civilization.
And
So
this
you have to be very
message,
careful about what you do elect to the
th-
canon.
this message that I do have to other pagans is like, you can't remove Christianity. You can only move through it. You can only move past it, but you can't remove it. It's there to stay. It's part of our heritage. Half of your ancestors are Christian. You can't get rid of that. It's not going nowhere, right? And likewise to the Christians too. You're not getting rid of the Iliad. You're not getting rid of the Havamal.
Those were the other examples. The Iliad is in the
Yeah.
Western canon. It sits right alongside the King James Bible. It sits right alongside Shakespeare. So
Yeah.
does Plato, Aristotle. A lot of these writers. There's a few big ones, and everyone knows this.
Hmm.
It still comes up all the time. So
Hmm.
it's how we reconcile that and move forward with that in mind. And again, some people might disagree with that. I can see why they might, because everyone has their sort of apprehension of the truth, but that seems correct to me, that
You inspired me too when you had said, and moving off of this, or sorry, moving with this theme, you had said that there's a lot of reactionaries, there's a lot of guys who want to like ditch liberalism. You can't undo liberalism. You can't undo the implications of the French Revolution. It's not possible. But what you can do is accept that torch and move forward. You
yeah.
can create something new out of it, but you can't go back. There's
What I
only
had
going
said was
forward.
liberalism can only be, let's say, defeated or moved through by the people who liberalism can only be moved past by people who move through it.
Hmm.
So the people who are looking towards Islam as an antidote to liberalism, when you take most Muslims and put them in a liberal country, you see their birth rates fall a lot. They get hooked on drugs. They turn gay. Like a lot of these more pure cultures, you might call them, they fall to liberalism. They fall to the worst
Hmm.
hedonisms you find within liberalism very, very fast. They don't have the computational power
No.
to like, and whatever their system is not set up to counter that. I think only maybe the Japanese have done it. They're trying to work through it the same way we are in different ways. The Japanese are going about it a different way, but like a lot of these groups, they don't have the stuff to really move through liberalism. They'll fall prey to it. It's only us who could like move past it. I know I'm using very reductive terms here, but that's what
Well,
I believe.
you also, some episodes ago, I think you floated with the idea, or you introduced the idea that it's almost like Westerners have antibodies to liberalism. It's almost like, in the way that we have media literacy, in the way that we know that certain advertisements that, on the screen that we see are obvious scams or obviously fake, uh, we have a sort of familiarity and resistance to liberalism because we've been a part of it for 300 years, and
Yeah.
those other cultures don't. They don't have that. They don't have the same sense and intuitive sense to navigate through that the same way that we do.
Yeah, it's hard for them to navigate through because liberalism is a very complicated space to move in. It's a lot of contextual relations, so you need to have a kind of a an advanced mind, not to just believe all the bullshit.
To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to understand liberalism.
You have to be a very high IQ to like understand white boy shit. You know, okay.
Yeah.
There's first you like new metal, then you
Oh
hate new
no.
metal, but then only real white guys can come out the other side and like new metal again, unironically.
All
And there's
right.
not a lot of white guys who are ready for that yet. It's
I thought
me
you were
and maybe
gonna. I thought you were gonna say rap rock, and I was like, "Oh no, Dimes, you're losing me here."
that is new metal. Yes, you are correct. You're not there yet, but you will be. Rap rock,
Uh,
it's there's some good Limp Biscuit really is that's white guy shit.
yes, you're right. I was thinking Papa Roach too.
Well, you know what? I was in the car listening, guess what? Listening to Rollin' by Limp
Uh,
Bizkit. Yeah, don't how about yeah? How about
How
okay?
about a? Can I get a hell yeah, please?
Yeah, can we get hell yeahs in the chat for Limp Bizkit Rollin', the most unironic Limp Bizkit song there ever is? If you can teach yourself to appreciate that, the West might not be fallen.
It might not be over.
We got this. I know you're listening to a good stream. We started off with all that deep theoretical stuff, and now it's like, yeah, like their new album still sucks. It's called Still Sucks, by the way. It's not. It's actually not as good as Golden Cobra. But yeah, no, like that's just part of getting older. Getting older is like
Yes.
realizing, you know what? All my music, the music I like is goofy and stupid, but that's okay. Whatever.
Yeah.
I like Bones. I like Suicide Boys. I like white guys who talk about like there's unironic Bones lyrics where he's like, "Yeah, I'm the graveyard god." Yeah,
Yeah.
nice.
I I think I'm about 10 years ish younger than you. So the peak for me musically was like the 2010s, like weird indie rock kind of phase. Like I was really into OK Go. I had like
Oh,
a
nice.
Franz, yeah, I had like a
What
Franz
happened to OK
Ferdinand.
Go? Because I
I have
remember their thing was kind of like gimmicky music videos, and I never
yeah,
disliked them. But what
yeah.
happened to them? Are they around?
I'm not sure. And from them like the 1975 and I'm embarrassed to admit once upon a time I liked Cobra Starship. So yeah, yeah, incredibly, yes, yeah, Big Ben. I see that. You're right. It's incredibly. It's funny. I saw this. I saw a reel. It was a guy, and he's like, when so and so song from like 2011 comes on, and you feel your serotonin restored to those levels, right? It's just like, yeah, it's weird. It's interesting how that crystallizes.
Yeah, after this is done, I'm gonna pull up YouTube and go listen to American Psycho by Treble Charger. That might be before your
Oh
time.
no.
I'm old as shit.
No, you're not that. What are you, like 38?
Well, yeah, young, a bit younger than that, but still,
36? Yeah, no,
yeah.
I'm only 30. I'm not that much younger than you.
Trying to think. Sorry, every fucking stream ends up like this. Me just like twiddling my thumbs, doing Trump hand gestures by myself, trying to be like, "Oh, what music do you like? Oh, do you like Arcade Fire?"
Yeah, Arcade Fire is okay.
So you what I'm trying to, because I can go deep into music still, but I'm trying to wonder if there's anything else I wanted to talk about here before we have to go, because we do have to get going soonish.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, you wanted to discuss a moratorium on wife guys. I remember that.
yes, okay, let's see if we can get to that, because this was another one that caused, I don't want to say caused some controversy. It did have a lot of comments.
Hmm.
So let me just see here. Where the fuck do I have it here? Here we go. Moratorium on wife guys.
Yes.
So, and I think I know the chat, or I know the conversation that inspired this. But give me the headline here. What are we talking about? Who are these wife guys? What is
All
their
right.
deal?
The long story short is that this guy said that uh, the cadre of childless thinkers who provide increasingly convoluted hot takes on solving the fertility intelligence crisis without having kids themselves is emblematic of the failure of the online right. So I wrote this piece that was basically like, look, A lot of emergent leaders over the next 10 to 15 years are going to be guys who don't have their proverbial shit together purely due to the socioeconomic circumstances of what's going on. And you look at a place like Canada, that's especially the case, or Ireland. Canada and Ireland are pretty much fucked in that regard. Canada, for example, has the lowest upwards mobility out of like 20 countries in the OECD for young people. So you're going to see a lot of these young guys, like, it's bad with me being 30, right? If you're 18 years old now, how's it going to be in 12 years, right? With the projections of the way things are going. So I basically I dissected their arguments. I was like, listen, it's actually not that easy for these people. You often get a suggestion like just go to church. So I break down the actual numbers of church attendance and self-identified Christians versus church attendance. They also try to say, well, why don't you move to a rural area and get like a starter home? And I'm like, and get a starter home with black mold that's not worth the amount of money you're putting in an economic dead zone with no social capital an aging populace, right? It's just like, and this was never what I got accused of, and I hate this. I hate it when I give up facts and figures and I'm like, look, this is the reality of the situation. You can accept it and then like move forward with that information. Move forward with confidence, knowing that you can make better decisions based on what the actual numbers are. But people see this, they're like, oh, you're just black pilling. You're just black pill dumping. I'm like, no, I'm not black pill dumping. I'm trying to stop people, in particular young men, from walking into machine gun fire, because a lot of advice that you hear on X from guys who were fortunate enough to, as they say in the comments, take the last chopper out of Nam. They got their wife, they got the decent paying career 10 years ago. They managed to put a down payment on a house, so they've got that fortress, they've got that castle, they've got that base. But a lot of the advice that they're giving, even those dudes, it's just not congruent to a lot of Zoomers. And I'm like, you're telling these guys to walk blind into machine gun fire. A lot of this stuff is just not good advice, and that's pretty much what the piece was. I was like, let's actually just look at the numbers here. This doesn't mean give up. It doesn't mean it's worthless. Like, don't try. It just means like, hey, like, there's a train coming. You probably want to step off the tracks.
I'm just reading the post here. You want a quality wife? Go to a trad church. Be awesome. Like, it's fucking How I Met Your Mother. Like,
well, exactly, right. And who was it? There was a number of guys like 2 weeks ago. They're like, you want to find a trad wife? Well, you gotta take 2 months off of work and just go drive across the country.
Fuck, I was talking to someone else about that.
Yeah, just drive across the country, and you're gonna find yourself a 9 out of 10 works at a gas station.
Yeah.
She'll never hurt. It's like, where are you getting this from? First of all, that's not even your memory. First of all, where did you meet your wife? Oh, you met her in a city. Oh, that.
Well, yeah. The funny thing is, I know the post you're talking about. I forget who I was talking about it to, but yeah, the post was like, take some time off, go on a road trip, and hit up every single rest stop on the way until you find a pretty server or a pretty enough server, and ask her to tell her that you want to get married. And he's like, the whole thing was, I knew a guy who did this. So you realize that this entire thing is like, I knew a guy. Like, everyone knows a guy who like fixed his fucking roof naked or some shit. Like, everyone knows a guy who did a thing.
I knew a guy who did this, but that guy that you knew is misremembering his own experience because it's been replaced with boomer movies from the 80s. But for real, right? It's just like a lot of this is stuff that they had wished they had done.
You're just merging your life with 5 easy pieces. Like, I met my wife. I picked her up on the side of the road. She kept talking about purity, and she kept talking about. If you haven't seen the movie, this will make sense to you. But like, merging your life with that movie would be fucking hilarious.
So I was just like, and then of course the housing cost, right? So I'm like, yeah, so you can buy a literal castle manor in France for $800,000 Canadian, right? I like that's better than whatever shitbox of drywall and particle board you're gonna get in Canada.
Yeah, your choices, realistically, and I've known people have done this. If you want, you're not going to find any steals or deals in the real estate market anywhere that you want to live. Every house, and I've been looking for months, every which way, every house you're going to get at a decent price that makes sense is going to be built on a fucking sinkhole. Or it's going to be a tear down, and it's still going to cost you $300,000. The only way to do it, I guess, is to buy a condo. You can still find like a bachelor-sized condo, but the building will be nice, it'll be in a good
Mhm.
area, but it'll just be really, really fucking small. But at least you know there's no dark secrets there. Or you go so far out, you can like you just go north. But in
Mhm.
Canada, going north, hey, look, going north in Canada is not like going north in America. Going north
No,
in Canada is like, oh, there's polar bears here, and every forest is haunted.
there's polar bears here. There are armies of mosquitoes that will give you diseases that were thawed out last winter. Um, the landmass is inhospitable. You're living in spruce bog or rock. The
Yeah,
land's not farmable.
look,
Like,
guys, it's 2024 as of this recording. If there's a place in the developed world where people aren't living, there's probably a good reason that they're not living there, and you would need a bunch of machines to make it livable. If you don't
right.
have those machines, you're gonna be squatting on a place until Satan shows up.
So I'm looking through this too, and I was just like, yeah, women actually in Canada and the States, a huge number of them under a certain age make actually more money than boys. So like Zoomer women tend to make more money than boys, and this completely throws a wrench into the whole traditional like dating dynamics, right? And so I threw in there too. I'm like, let's get a feminine perspective, assuming it's not a revealed preference thing. But they were as anonymous as possible so that I can try and get a non-biased, answer out of them. And a lot of them say, I do want kids. The problem is like I can't find like it's not economically viable. It's just I can't afford it. It's either
That's
I
the
can't
big
afford
one.
it, I can't afford it, or I don't want to offer any children I have a quality of life that is worse than what I experienced. And in fairness, that's my story too. Like I was from a lower middle class urban family. Upwards mobility destroyed. We descended into poverty. I'm just, and people are like, well, just make the sacrifice. It's like, well, at some point, and to Judas's credit, I'm sure he's going to listen to this. To Judas's credit, you got to put your money where your mouth is and just have the kids. I do agree with him. Gun to my head, is it destitute poverty, trailer park, whatever, have kids or not? I'm going to have kids with the dumbest, most retarded, biggest titted woman I can find. If that's how bad my situation is. But if it's not my situation, ideally, that's not how I want to do it. But the socioeconomics are the main reason, and even Fancy, I think Fancy in the Blood Satellite chat would say, it's the economy, stupid. I don't like the chart guys. I don't like the chart guys because they miss a lot of the social stuff. But when it comes to child rearing, it is just straight up mostly an issue of socioeconomics. I promise you, people will have kids if it's viable.
That argument that you had said, you will find that a lot, especially from women, and especially from women who grew up poor. You see this with poor people a lot, where they said, "I don't want to raise my kids the way I was raised," and they'll really, really believe that. So in their minds, they need to make a certain threshold of money until they want to have
Mhm.
kids. And from a mother's perspective, I do understand that.
Yeah.
But that can be like a runaway train where, like, my wife was kind of like this too before we started having kids, where she's like, I want to be able to send them to a good school. And I said, okay,
Mm,
there's no, like, I kind of had to break the spell of that. And you will probably need to break the spell over your women as well, because a lot of women will say, like, I want to send them to private school. I'm like, okay, here's the thing.
yeah.
Even if we could scrape together the money to send our kid to private school, because you need to be making like 500,000 to do that. If we could do that, he will still be the poorest kid at private school, which you also don't want. Like, you
Right.
you have to understand the strata that a lot of these families come from, or the level of money. They're also ingratiated in certain communities that we're not part of. Like, we would need to change our whole lifestyle, which I wish we could. Hey, fingers crossed we can do that.
Mhm.
But a lot of the people who really excel in like Ivy League schools, they come from a long line of established, like, they're from dynasty families, or they're from families that know what they're doing there. You're
Right.
not the charity case that showed up. So I just said, like, look, that's a good dream. However, if that dream means that we're not having kids now, like, that dream might never come true. And then it's gonna be too fucking late.
That's
And I
right.
think there's a lot of people who are possessed by these sort of pie in the sky fantasies
Yes,
where
and
it's
they're
like, even if
waiting.
you could get there, you don't even really want that if you think about it.
No, and you said, and we started the beginning of the stream with, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good," and that's what that is. And I do see a lot of women using that as a cope too. A lot of people in general, actually, dudes are using that as a cope. Well, it has to be. It doesn't have to be perfect. But the thing is, and I also went into that too. It's not like millennials and Gen X, or sorry, Gen Z, are looking for a McMansion. They don't want a 4 or 5 bedroom McMansion and 2 cars. Actually, if you ask most millennials and Zoomers what they want, younger millennials anyway, they would probably be fine with some rustic, I don't know, cottage core 2 bedroom. You know what I mean? Like
Dude,
just a nice little piece
same.
of property,
Let me
just
tell
like
you
a nice
this.
little.
My wife, like, she again had these ideas in her head of the house that she wanted. Very nice, a nice house, right?
Yeah,
She's at the point where she just wants a fucking bullshit suburban home with siding. Like, she doesn't care. She's like, I would just like a place.
exactly.
I would love a place with 3 bedrooms that I don't need to get raped for. That's it. And just like the house metaphor is really good here, because when it comes to dating, let me tell you, men's standards have never been lower. You know what I mean? I
Yes.
think, like,
Oh
to
man.
be an attractive prospect for a man, ladies, it really is 3 things. Don't be fat, and don't be like, we'll handle a crazy woman. Just don't be so insane that you're an immediate threat to my life or my children's lives. You can be right up to the edge and we'll be okay with it. I promise you. Sometimes something that has a benefit. So don't be that, don't be fat. And I think that's about it, because I was going to say don't be like a slut, but I think that kind of goes with the second one too. So yeah, that's it. That's all you got to fucking be, guys. We don't even need big boobs. There's small boob
Yeah,
appreciators out there.
absolutely. I'm actually not a yeah, yeah, yeah. So my example with that though is like it's not even that a lot of these young guys and a lot of these young couples, if they're lucky enough to manage to meet each other, they're not asking for much, but they still can't even get the bare minimum of what they want. That's what they're holding it off for. That's what they're holding it off for. They're not holding off having kids for a McMansion. They're holding off having kids for even a lower standard of living than what their own parents would have. And that's, so the whole piece was just like, yeah, have some sympathy for these guys, because it's tough out there for guys who are in their 30s. Imagine how bad it's going to be if you're 18, right?
Yeah, and I try to I treat these problems seriously, and it's very easy to dismiss them. To go to young people and say, just shut up, just have 5 kids. And I know some people will do that, but I'm like, okay, just hold on. This is a problem. I'm hearing their problem. Their problem is that they think the economics don't make sense. I'm going to treat that seriously. I'm going to say, okay, let's talk about that, because you're not stupid for thinking that, but there's a solution to that. We got some of Vulpus Persona in here saying multi-generation family compound for the win. Good idea. I think there's some interesting solutions out there for building multi-generational family compounds. Like, there's options, but you have to
Mm-hmm.
desire to see those options. And like I saw with my wife, I'm not saying I changed her over time, but she came to the same realizations that I did. And most women will, if you kind of keep the pressure on them. And I don't want to sound like pressure, but like, keep reminding them that time is of the
Persuasion.
essence. Also, like, not to come across as misogynistic, but one thing I found with women, despite their highly attuned harm avoidance and their spatial awareness, they tend to struggle with conceptualizing worst case scenarios in the mid to long term.
Right.
And I'll give you an example of that. And I'm not throwing my wife under the bus here, but I've seen other women do this. That when she was pregnant with our first child, I didn't. I don't think she really considered how much her life was going to change. She kind of knew it abstractly. And this is why guys tend to panic more, I think, because they really start to think about how their life is going to change, and it freaks them out. And I think women, of course, they bear the physical burden. Of course, pregnancy is scary and you're all fucked up hormonally. But I think for a lot of women, they don't realize that their life is going to change until the kid is actually born and they're doing those first few 3 a.m. breastfeeds or whatever it might be. But they didn't really think about it like that. It's only when it happened did it dawn on them, whereas guys, I think, could kind of game that out. Similarly with birth generally, women don't really imagine themselves as 50 and childless. It's not real for them, whereas guys, I think, can viscerally feel that fear a bit more. Women just don't think it'll happen until it happens, and then it's too late. Then you have this whole wave of women who are regretting their whole lives and taking it out on younger women, whatever. But it's like, when you talk about sort of walking women along there, it's like you're just trying to help them realize that time is of the essence. That's all you're
Hmm.
trying to do, because left to their own devices, I don't think they'll hunt for it like that. Like women will start hunting to have kids when they're like 42,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
you got to kind of put it in their heads earlier and a bit more aggressively when they're younger because they won't come to that conclusion themselves anyway. I hope that contributed in some way. I'm just reading the comments right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and and again, that's all it was meant to be. It was like, here, this is a reportage on how bad the situation is. Maybe you should go easier on these young guys instead of just insulting them and giving them boomer advice.
And here's the Black Horse, a good friend. He says, I mean, we can treat it seriously, but unless you're uniquely talented, a Canadian Millennial Z is going to have a lower standard of living than their
Hmm.
parents. And this is kind of what I was getting to before about a multi-generational compound. It's like, no one wants to fucking do that. And I've had very serious conversations with my wife. Like, this is something we're talking about doing. Like, okay, are we doing a big thing and bringing our in-laws? And that's something that our parents didn't have to do. They could just branch out in every direction across this
Right.
country and not have to. They're coming to us now because they're getting old and saying, oh, can we live with you? Because they put their parents in retirement homes.
Brutal.
It's sick. If whatever, I won't get into that, but
Yeah. Yeah.
the solutions we're trying to come up with are solutions that our parents never had to deal with. And that's something that Judas and I have been talking about for a long time, that we're the first people in our I don't know, 3 generations going backwards that have had asked these questions about, like, okay, how do we start? How do I make a multi-generational house? How
Hmm.
do I get a house that I actually want to pass down to my children? Because my parents, my grandparents, none of them actually wanted to pass their house down. They thought it was just a fucking investment, sold it at the first thing, and they're built like shit, you know.
Yeah.
But
Oh yeah.
so I want to be the first guy who makes a multi-generational house to pass down to my children and some land and the whole thing. But we're the first ones to want to do that. So you have to learn a whole bunch of new shit. Just like we're talking about the religions earlier, like there's a lot of unprecedented problems that we're presented with. That's a lot to put on a young guy. But like Black Horse was saying, like, we got to fucking make our way
Yeah. Oh
through it.
yeah. Like I said, it's not a black pill. It's just like, yeah, here's your parameters. This is the board. Uh, let's play the game. But yeah, no. So don't get me wrong on that.
Yeah. And I think that's what you were getting at earlier when you said, like, look, you're not looking for riches. We're not in search of utopia. I My belief is, and this is my belief at least, no one in my generation or Gen Z believes they're going to have a retirement.
Hmm.
Like, they don't believe, whether or not, I know Sean Wyland is in the chat as well. He's a very keen economic mind, and we've talked about this extensively. He's almost sure we're not going to have it, but there's a sense that, like, whatever good stuff my grandparents have, that's not afforded to me.
Yeah.
But that's such, like, that's a darkness in the future we can't even look at yet. But I think our generations, we're having more intense conversations about survival, maybe more than, I mean, you have to go back to like your great grandparents who may very well have built a cabin in the woods to raise 5 kids. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. But guess what? They weren't happy, not in the sense that your
No.
grandparents were happy, but they just had to fucking do it. My great grandmother never fucking smiled, because they had that real shit to
Yeah,
do.
it's true, and obviously, I mean, this goes without saying in our spaces, right? But the pursuit of happiness as a goal itself is not tenable. It's not realistic. You're never going to be happy. What you can do is pursue meaning. You can pursue virtue. I don't know, and that will bring you happy. Is what the doing is what makes you happy. The doing is what gives you meaning, and from the meaning you get happiness. And yes, it's true. Winkler says, "I cry looking at my pay stubs, seeing the Canada pension plan deductions, knowing that my money is just gone forever." Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, try, and if you start making any serious money, and maybe Black Horse could weigh in on this, but if you're making a decent salary, if you're into the 6 figures, half of it's gone. 46, you can get up to
Yeah,
52% of your paycheck taken away just by taxes very, very fast as you're get because they say that you need to make, what is it, like 250 grand a year to comfortably afford a house in Canada.
yeah.
Now, at that point, you're getting 60% of your paycheck taken anyway.
Um, it was a National Post article released yesterday, actually, where it was like Canadians pay more in taxes than they actually like earn in money. or something like that. I'm not phrasing that correctly. Sorry, 60% of their income goes to taxes in general, like on average, just taxes on taxes. So they're just being absolutely squeezed like no tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's why, we are cognizant of t every time I tell someone I present a solution where it's like, "Oh, here's something we can do within the system." They correctly say that the system's corrupt. I'm like, "I know. I'm just trying."
Mhm,
I'm trying to find a way.
mhm.
Every so often, hey, maybe there's gonna be a prime minister I wanna vote for in the future. I'm not so
No.
cynical that if Maxime Bernier started walking out with and started shooting journalists, I might think, hey, this is a guy I can vote for.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean, I don't think he's going to win, and not in this election. Probably not in 2030, if Canada even exists by the end of the decade. But he did say something very recently that got my blood pumping. He got my blood pumping. I'll give him that. And what he said was basically blood and soil. That we've been here for 400 and a half years, and that we are a people. And that kind of blew me away. He's the first Canadian politician, maybe even the first American, or sorry, North American in general, to say, yeah, actually, we are a people. We have been here for a very long time. We're not just a hodgepodge of immigrants. He said that my culture is a unique product of North America. We are, there's a distinction there. We're not just immigrants who came yesterday. And he was saying this in response to an Indian too.
there's something about Indians. There's something about Indians that's got the libs watching Hitler speeches. It's
Yeah,
got the libertarians going full blood and soil.
I
It's like
had
this little magic thing I didn't think I'd expect.
I had a fat libtard they them colleague, and I explained to him one day. I was like, "Listen, you're not owning a home unless they go." I'm like, "It's literally you or them. There's no, And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "You're right. Send them all back." I was like, "That's what I thought. Good boy.
Can I just say
Attaboy."
this? I don't like talking about her that often, but my sister, grown woman, but she's very, very, let's just call her progressive. In every, back in the day, she was the prototypical social justice warrior, and she would
Right.
probably wear that with pride. Um, but I remember seeing this even before now, even before the mass migration thing. I started seeing little tremors within her facade the day that I heard her complaining that, and I call a helpline. It's always like I can't understand what they're saying. I can't understand their accent. I'm like, oh, okay. Like
Mhm,
there was
mhm.
something that happened in like the Gen X and the younger white mind where it's like, I want to call up a company and complain and I can't because there's an Indian person. That was it. That was the first domino that started
Yeah.
all this.
Well, and I touched on that in what was it? Great Canadian Darkness. You call the CRA, you call the banks, you call TELUS, you call your internet service provider. Everybody you talk to is an Indian. Everybody you talk to is either Indian or Filipino or some other foreigner. Every single federal and provincial employee that you talk to who works in the administration is a foreigner, if not Jeet, right? Like and I think that has an effect on people.
Yeah, that's the first thing that really started driving them to this point.
Yeah.
Seems
Oh yeah.
inconspicuous enough, but yeah, it's just the helplines. That's what got my mom, and
Mhm.
she's like an apolitical type of person. She's
Yes.
caught between she's caught between two extremes. There's myself and my sister who are like frankly, were like caricatures. Really, and then she's just in the middle watching like old sitcoms and like I was talking to your sister the other day and she said something about indigenous rights and then then I'll bat it back to her. I'll fill my mom's head with something. She'll go to my sister. Then we just like
Yeah.
ping pong her back and forth. Um, that's it's very stereotypical. I'm sure a lot of people have that sort of situation. Anyway, um, I know we gotta get going, so we're at over 2 hours. I didn't think we'd get to over 2 hours. I'm pleasantly
Yeah.
surprised.
Me too. A lot of content to go through.
Yeah, I think we covered the wife guy thing as much as I wanted to, because we joke in the chat and on the show, I guess, that myself and Judas are wife guys. And I always wondered, like, is there a difference between someone who has a wife and a wife guy?
A part of that piece in the message that I left, I had said that there is no force in the universe more powerful than young single guys who got nothing to lose. And that's not a demographic you want to alienate. That's a demographic you want on your side because they're the ones who get things done. And I would say that that motivation to gain everything rather than the maintenance of trying not to lose something, or sorry, trying not to lose something, I would say that that motivation is more powerful. That's a harder energy. That's a stronger energy.
You know, there's something I always thought, and this feels like a bad take from me, a very rare bad take. I'm going to say it. I'm going to invite all of this
Please.
scorn. But I think a wife guy would also be someone who leads with that in their bio, online bio,
Yes.
whatever, or
Yeah.
they're always
Father, dad. This. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
father, husband, and look, I
Yeah.
am a father and I am a husband, but it never felt right putting that as like the first two things in your bio, maybe
Right.
above author, maybe above,
Yeah.
Marine veteran, whatever the other shit, I'm like, maybe, and I could frame this in a way where I'm saying that should go without saying. Maybe everyone should be a father and husband, whatever.
Right.
But also, I'm like, I don't know, I don't like it. What do you think?
I agree with you. And I try to touch on that too, where it's like, if reproduction is this easy thing, why is it such a big deal for you? It's kind of a weird little hypocrisy there. And I agree with you. If I was married and I had kids, I wouldn't put that in my bio either. I think it's an odd. It's like we're in such a fallen state that that's a flex now.
Yeah. And, I do fight to not bring up my son because, you do strike me as someone who would be a good father. And when it's going to happen, you're going to
Yeah.
you won't shut the fuck up about it. I know you.
No,
You're just going to bring it up all
no.
the time.
I love kids. I would be absolutely enamored to have kids, and I won't shut the fuck up when I have kids. You're gonna be the first person I'm gonna tell when when I have children, right?
You're gonna do like the Viking like haircut where it's like shaved to the side, but there's like one braided ponytail at the
Oh
back.
no, I'm not. I'm not gonna do that. Please, no,
And
no,
see here's Black Horse, married, 4 kids, not in my bio.
no,
I got
good.
all kinds of
No,
fake shit in my bio.
yeah.
All I have in my bio is actionable threats. I don't need
You
people
know,
knowing that I got kids.
I don't even like the label of vitalist. I just have that in my bio because I've been realizing over the last 3 months I'm kind of like a small V vitalist.
Small V violence.
I thought you might appreciate that. I've been sitting on that one for a while. Small V vitalist.
We gotta normalize saying dumb, annoying shit. I like that.
Dumb. That's a Canadian reference for anyone else listening.
And also, you can tell when someone's very serious politically, praxeologically, when their entire online presence is just fake nonsense
Yeah.
bullshit. It's just you got a dumb name. The best guys I know have the dumbest names, and
Yes.
their bio is just something ironic.
Yes, I would agree with that. There's so many guys on Twitter with just the funniest names.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, here's Vulpus Persona. I think putting a button on it. Duty shouldn't be a flex. I
Hmm.
think I like that. That's a great way. That's a smarter way of putting it than the way I put it.
Hmm.
I set him up. The chat knocks him down. That's what we get him here.
Yeah,
Oh, we
that's a
got
good way.
Nudge Nude. Also, small peen vitalist.
Yeah, absolutely. That's gonna be my new Twitter bio.
Oh, Blue Devil
Instead of
70.
at Fortissax, it's gonna be at small peen vitalist.
Blue Devil. I love kids. Uh-oh.
Oh.
You know what sucks though? Because I always got along with kids. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know. We're on the same maturity wavelength. But if you're a guy, you're taught growing up like you can't just like hanging around kids because all the pedophiles out there. So,
Right.
my whole life I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna because I volunteered at like a summer camp one time and like, yeah, I'm playing with the kids, we're playing swords and things like that. I like dumb shit. But then you're like, okay, well, that's more for women to do. Then I learned as an adult, women molest a lot.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
guess that changes there. I could have been sword fighting with kids this whole time. These bitches got in my head.
Yeah. It's so weird, right? And I think you brought this up on the show too months ago. I don't remember what episode it was, but
Let me just say, Vulpus Persona again with no fap divorce. Okay, go ahead.
you uh, fuck, dude. Okay, so you brought up, what was it? before like the boomers and the silent gen, uh there was almost a sense that men were more hospitable towards children and towards their own children and child rearing than generations after them. Sorry, men before that time might be more interested in investing in their children. And something happened, I don't know, in the early 20th century where they've got this whole like distant, I don't want to spend any fucking time with my kids. That's for women to do. Um, dealing with kids that's for women to do. And it's just like, bro, that's your child. Like, are you
Yeah,
telling me you don't want them to excel in English? Are you telling me you don't want them to, you're not going to read to them every night because that's a woman's job? I'm sorry, but
yeah. Keep in
you
mind,
know what
and
I mean?
also when you have children, and this to anyone who's listening, um, especially if you're a guy. Let me start by saying this: I know more men, and by men I mean guys who have it figured out. They love lifting, they love shooting, they work, they have their stuff figured out. I've seen more men my generation genuinely excited about not only having children but raising their children.
Yeah.
And I was going to bring this up on the show at some point, maybe next episode, but just to put a pin in it now, I've seen way more women and mothers than I expected really not liking their children. And I
Yes.
see it firsthand when me and the wife take our son out, to play groups and shit. Like the things you hear come out of mothers' mouths is
Oh,
like shocking, and then you see it online too. So I don't know if there was a more of a flip than I imagined, but with the men, there's more of an idea of not even taking a nurture role, but I'm going to raise them. I want to teach them stuff
yeah.
for boys and girls too,
Yeah.
and that's
Whereas
interesting.
whereas with women, it's justifying tossing your infant out a window because of postpartum depression, and it's just like, what the fuck is going on when you look
Yeah,
at that situation, right? Why are dudes more enthusiastic about teaching their kids how to box and how to deadlift than
yeah.
women are being spending basic time around their kids? It's very
And,
strange.
and it could tie into what we were discussing before about men's general, concern with survival. Like maybe, like in times past, we're convinced that okay, we need a family unit to like band together and survive for what's
Hmm,
coming, whatever it might
that's
be.
interesting.
But also, when we talked about I don't want to blame baby boomers, of course, but the baby boomer generation are the ones that people will think of when you talk about sort of kind of an low-lying hostility towards their children at distance. But then you have to think
Yeah.
about who raised the baby boomers. It was them too.
Yes.
So maybe you could blame two world wars. Like that could be the easy answer. Like there's a distinct trauma. Maybe not baby boomers. Well, no, the generation that went through two world wars that raised their kids. There's some kind of generational trauma
Yeah.
and relationship to the family that maybe we're just kind of getting out of. That could be
Wow.
it. But
What
it could
was
be a lot
the
of things.
what was that? That was like a parenting style where everything was like you touch starve your children. What was that called?
I don't. Well, it could be called touch starving.
Well, I don't remember the exact. The whole point was like you don't want to be too you don't want to be too affectionate towards your kids because they might be too attached to you or something like that. Anyway, there was a whole bunch of studies that revealed over time that this was like horrible and that it was absolutely detrimental on the children that they raised, and it was
Yeah.
an insanely bad way to do things. Um,
Also, just from experience, they will. My son isn't that old yet, but they do hit an age where they just want to fuck off and do their own thing anyway. Like
yeah,
you don't need
well,
to train them to do that.
no, and it's interesting this flip that we're discussing too, because I you know how we might think that getting your hair cut every 3 weeks, wearing clothes that fit, ironing your shirt or whatever, um, stuff like that. We might think of that as kind of gay. We might think of like basic grooming as kind of gay. There's certainly a huge cohort that thinks even basic grooming is excessive. You had a lot of jokes online where it's like, is washing your ass gay, fellas? Right. So but I had to think back to, because like my grandfather, and maybe it's because he was in the military, but my grandfather was in the Royal Canadian Navy, and my great grandfather was in the Royal Canadian Air Force. But he got up every day and he always combed his hair and he wore his best clothes. He was always well groomed. We had a very immaculate bathroom. And at some point throughout the generations, it's like basic maintenance, basic as a dude, basic maintenance came to be seen as like primp, came to be seen as gay, came to be
Yeah,
seen as effeminate. It's
or
very
like
strange.
caring about things too. Because my grandfather, who had passed away, he was a very, he's a lawyer and he was in the Navy as well. But like what was the situation? Like he thought any man who had the ability to cook was like laughable.
Yeah,
And
right. It's like
I'm like, well, like being able to look, okay, you don't need to be making fucking cupcakes, but if you don't know how to like make a stew, if you don't know how to do some basics, well, what, you're cooler than a cowboy? Fuck off. You know how to make, like, he didn't know how to, he
yeah,
couldn't boil a fucking egg, this guy, and he just thought he was above that. But I'm like, that just means
yeah,
that's a skill you don't have for a time when you might need it.
right. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's like, bro, you can't even you're telling me you can't even make a stir fry, and I'm gay. Get the fuck out of here. It's I don't know.
Yeah, and it was just like a list of things that they didn't wanna do, and they defined themselves by their inability to do these things, whereas with other guys, it's like, well, like, you gotta learn these in just in a survival sense. Like, do you know how to "Oh, sewing, that's women's work." I'm like, well, if you're
Mhm.
living in the woods, you wanna learn how to sew your fucking pants if they rip. Like, that's
That's
just a s
another thing. That's
yeah.
another thing he could do. He fucking sewed his own clothes. That's whack.
Yeah, and so it's like, "Oh, I know, grandpa, that's because you never go outside. It's because you just watch TV all fucking day and don't talk to anybody ever." Like, "Oh, what a
Yeah,
great like, look and all your
yeah,
kids are fucked up. Surprise,
yeah,
surprise." Anyway,
yeah.
that's just from the house of dimes. But I bet a lot of people have that same sort of thing, like and then these guys, unfortunately, tragically wonder why their family sees them as a bank account.
Right, right.
Because they didn't feel like imparting any wisdom was important, you know?
Yeah, no sense of lineage, no sense of passing things on.
Yeah, my son's gonna get all kinds of knowledge, all sorts of dumb shit, and all my opinions, and he's already listening to all my music because he can't do anything about it.
You've already made him a Radiohead fan. It's over.
Yeah, no, guess he doesn't like Radiohead yet, but he's gonna get there, just like my fucking wife is gonna get there one day. She didn't even like The Bends, and The Bends is like their most approachable album for women. She's like, "I don't get it." Like, "What do you mean you don't get it? What do you
What
mean you
do
don't
you
get
mean you
it?"
don't get it?
I haven't even
Oh
gone
man.
to, like, you're not ready for In Rainbows yet, but you're not ready
Oh.
to, like, dissect it. I'm getting wrapped up in a thing again. I'm getting wrapped up. You got me on the Radiohead.
Well, this is me introducing girlfriends to Proto Men and being like, yeah, so it's like it's a rock drama of Mega Man, and it's like really cool. And like this character is like singing, but he's actually like speaking to the other character. Like you know, 40. I don't really get it. Like it's really cute that you're into this nerdy stuff, but uh like no, listen, it's great.
So we do need to get going now, but there was one comment here from for white well-being. He said saying children are too expensive is like saying survival is too expensive. It reminded me of this great line I heard from this show called Full House, which a lot of
Mhm.
people listen to. I forget who specifically said it, but it was referred to me recently, and I was reminded of it. He said, have as many kids as you think you can afford, then have one more.
Mhm.
But I like that because it kept the word afford in there, and I got into a debate with someone about this not long ago, but because they were saying just have as many kids as you can, as fast as you can,
Mhm.
have like 8 kids, but I'm like, "Okay, I get the, vitality of what you're saying, but we have to admit there is a level of poverty that you don't wanna fall below because
Yes.
then you will sort of and I use the word dysgenic, and they kind of push back against that, but dysgenic, I mean creating a living situation that maximizes the opportunity for neglect and maybe drug abuse and all kinds of shit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways, and I've known people even within our community who were raised that way. Like I was one of 8 kids, and we lived in this shack, and it fucked a lot of us up. And so I understand the be fruitful, and multiply, of course.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I can't forget these real life stories of guys who came from that background and said, look, it ain't all that, especially if you can't afford it.
Mhm.
And so there is a reality here where it's like, look, okay, I get how you want to have as many as possible. However, there's a worst case scenario. And if you don't admit there's a worst case scenario, I think that's where you start, like you said, sending guys into a firing line and not preparing to create not only just create more kids, but create a good genetic stock. You don't get it over your head. You don't just have a bunch of fail
Yeah.
sons.
There has to be some degree, there has to be some path of upwards mobility, upwards social mobility for those kids. Because if there isn't, now you have contributed to the underclass, and you might be screwing your entire bloodline.
Yeah, so I just want to keep those two in mind because I always ask myself, is this something I would recommend
Mhm.
a young man if I'm giving genuine advice and I give a shit about this person? I would say, yes, be fruitful, multiply. There's some Catholicism for you, but then also like I don't know, man. Also, and this is a weird thing. Some people won't like me bringing this up. It is possible to kind of harangue the woman into wanting to have more children than she really wants, and then she ends up taking it out on the kids in weird ways. And that's
Yes.
just that's just a metric you got to keep in mind.
Yeah.
You can get them it's easy to get them up to like 3 or 4, but to get someone to 7 or 8, which is what everyone wants to do, I'm like, man, you gotta.
I don't want to be the guy to open the can of worms of abortion, but low key, if a woman doesn't want kids, it's probably better not to force her. Right? It's probably
Yeah,
better to just avoid and find a woman who does want kids, or is at least at the minimum open to the idea of kids. That's what I think. Because I don't, that sounds like a nightmare. That sounds like a postpartum, a postpartum murder justification waiting to happen.
most normal women will tell you the same thing. It's like, I want kids, but someday. And some people think that's a soft no. Not really, that's a yes. They just
No.
haven't thought about it yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Women who have a hard no, those are more difficult and you might be wasting your time, like,
Absolutely.
and that might not be the type of person you want raising the kids because then they'll take it out on you. But like most normal women will like, they'll
Yes.
say maybe, but the maybe's yes. They just haven't thought about it yet.
Right. Right. I'd agree with that.
All right, so we gotta get it going. We've been talking for a while. This was a phenomenal interview. I had a great time with this one, and we had a bunch of friends of the show pop in, which is
Yeah.
always great to see. Now, I want to make sure that people can get to where you're at. Let me just share the screen here one last time. Just going to share this one because I love the image. Fortissax is typing is what we're looking at here. Fortissax is typing. That's your Substack, fortissax.substack.com.
Yes,
Is
sir.
there anywhere else you would like people to find you? I think you're on X as
Telegram.
well.
Yeah, X and Telegram. My handle is at 40 sacks, as in 40 bags.
Yeah,
At
let's have a look
40
here.
sacks.
40 sacks. Here we go. You got to change that capital V to a small V now.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I was just like, why is everyone kind of gay coded and Jewish? This is getting a little weird.
Yeah. So check them
So
out on at 40 sacks on X, and then you're also on Telegram as well.
that's right. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
All right, so check him out there. Great stuff. You're going to be hearing more from him in the future, I'm sure. Let me just switch back to this tab. Here we go. All right, so and especially this is your first one that you wrote that got such traction. The Great Canadian Darkness. We didn't cover that, but I think that would be a good place to start for a lot of people.
Yes.
Check that out. All right. So once again, thank you so much. I had a great time. We're going to have you back on in the future.
Please, thank you, Dimes. It's been an honor. I'm a longtime fan of the show. It's been great to have been encouraged to start writing and to start making content, especially for the community that we both came from. So really, the pleasure, the honor is yours, honestly.
All right, man. It's great to talk to you. I'll talk to you